Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, November 26, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Andrew Marantz, writer for The New Yorker and author of Antisocial, Online Extremists, Techno-Utopians, and the Hijacking of the American Conversation. Also on the program today, federal court rules that Don McGahn must testify and answer congressional subpoena. But of course, McGahn appeals. However, this will start an onslaught of legal filings to get the Trump administration to provide a lot more. Meanwhile, SCOTUS temporarily stays access to Trump's financial records, and federal subpoenas are issued to probe Rudy Giuliani's businesses for potential money laundering, obstruction of justice, and campaign finance laws violations. Meanwhile, a federal court in Michigan finds that Michigan's Independent Districting Commission can move forward in drawing 2020 maps. Big deal. That's not facetious. Meanwhile, Trump wants the war criminals he pardoned to campaign with him.
Nothing paramilitary at all.
Betsy DeVos to issue new rules to protect potential sexual assaulters on campus. And
can they campaign too?
Virginia Governor Northam signals he's not interested in rolling back Virginia's anti-union laws, even though fully controlled by Democrats now. Sanders calls on Major League Baseball to reverse its plan to close 25% of the minor league teams. And Joe Biden's liaison to Latino, African American, and women's groups quits because she was working for Joe Biden.
I could be a fly on that wall.
Indeed. Well, I think that's the
Go
problem.
work for someone else. Fine.
I think that's the problem. That's what they were basically had relegated.
You want to be put on someone else's website? Fine.
Oh, forgive me, Father.
Yeah, forgive me.
Kentucky Republicans to pull the North Carolina stunt and try to strip a newly elected Democratic governor of the governor's power. All this and more on today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We got a lot of things to get to. We have 2 more days for our broadcast week. We will be taking mostly calls tomorrow and getting to some news stories, particularly a talk. Well, one of the things we'll touch on is obviously all these legal cases that are going forward. They're going to have implications in a myriad of different ways, and we will also talk about a speech that Brett Kavanaugh gave that indicates the regulatory system that we have in this country, as we know it from the federal government, is in serious jeopardy. And so keep this in mind, regardless of what we talk about on the context of the 2020 campaign. The Supreme Court has the ability to stymie a lot of things, maybe not permanently. I mean, we've seen in the past where the Supreme Court has been overcome over the course of a decade or so, although they were well entrenched for decades, stymieing all sorts of political reforms. And it's quite possible we're going to be heading into a sort of another Lochner era, as it were. But we will talk about that more tomorrow. Also, just a reminder, AM Quickie available. You can sign up for it at amquickie.com. And also, this program relies on your support. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. There's a little bit of like the Empire Strikes Back quality to the Democratic primary that's happening now. Barack Obama claims that he was misinterpreted in that New York Times article where he talked about how you shouldn't be way out there trying to get all sorts of different stuff. I think the first piece that was written about it, I think, sort of mischaracterized it. But the second one, which was, I think, gave a little more clarity, I think was just as problematic. And now there's a piece in Politico talking about his desire to step on, here it is, about Barack Obama, that he's been hanging back, but back when Sanders seemed like more of a threat than he does now, Obama said privately that if Bernie were running away with the nomination, Obama would speak up to stop him. That's very sweet of him.
A threat to what, I want to know?
Well, I think he seemed like more of a threat in terms of electorally. Now,
he's a disciple of Farrakhan. This is anti-Semitism. I'm learning my Warren techniques right now.
And you know, we'll talk about Bloomberg. I'm not we will talk about Bloomberg later in the program, but I'm not quite convinced that isn't part of Bloomberg's agenda. I mean, usually you go into these situations and it's never about necessarily one thing. You assess various different scenarios, and if the majority of them work out, at least in as you perceive as a net positive, then maybe you do something. So I think Mike Bloomberg has sort of like multi-tiered reasons for entering the race, of course, starting with his ego. But here's another guy who's back from the dead, and talk about a smooth forehead controversy. Here is Rahm Emanuel.
Oh, wow, yeah.
He is on ABC's This Week. And he is there to be the voice of the most hated man in the Democratic Party. I really don't know that there is, well, I think that's probably an overstatement. By the most hated man, perhaps by the left wing of the Democratic Party. From day one, this guy saw as his job as stymieing progressives' influence within the Obama administration and upon the Obama administration. And so, of course, he's the one who comes and speaks for Democrats and really mischaracterizes, I think, the entire Democratic Party project since the early 20th century. Here is Rahm Emanuel.
Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders credit. They brought their A game to the policy debate. There is a history from the New Deal to the New Frontier to the New Covenant President Clinton to the One America under President Obama of respecting the value of work, shared responsibility, equal access to opportunity. And the fact is, free income, free college, guaranteed health care has walked away from the traditional value system that Democrats, the traditional liberal system, going from Roosevelt backwards. Look, Social Security, payroll tax. Medicare, payroll tax. Earned income tax credit is based on work. AmeriCorps under President Clinton is value of service to country. And that traditional argument, both Deval Patrick, Mike Bloomberg, and Barack Obama, notice have not spoken up, and all the other candidates have got to bring their A game, like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have, to the policy debate.
Yeah, this is stunning. First of all, this is a total fabrication. You can go back. There's a speech by John Kennedy about the idea of Medicare for all. You can go back to Truman era when they were trying to get a Medicare for all. I don't know if they called it Medicare for all, but health care for everyone. This is just absurd. The idea that free college is sort of some type of new idea. Go ask your parents. Go ask their parents about a free university.
Was free until very recently.
You had it in many, many states around the country, and state colleges were always heavily discounted, if not free.
FDR, the third of the four freedoms, is freedom from want. Globally, by the way, not in that speech, not even just the United States, everywhere.
The idea.
Harvey K. would throttle Rahm Emanuel.
But really, any full-on Democrat should throttle him. The idea that the earned income tax is part of democratic values, it was a Republican plan adopted by his boss. This is just bizarre. It's bizarro world. I don't know what George Stephanopoulos did after that, but I'm quite sure he didn't push back on it. Maybe Chris Christie stood up and said, "No, well, wait a second. That's not right, Rahm." But it's just bizarre. It's bizarre the lengths in which they're going to go. And so there's a lot more coming forward with this. And, when I look at we have questions like, why is Deval Patrick? And we talked about this with Perrine on Friday. Why is Deval Patrick in the race? Why is Mike Bloomberg in the race? I think a lot of it is as much for them to win the nomination, or perhaps even more than for them to win the nomination, than to prevent the most left candidates in the race from winning. I think that's just basically the reality. And what's also interesting here is, and I guess maybe this can be taken as a positive, you're not hearing as much as we have in the past. They can't win in the general. And
because they have no data to support that.
That's true. And I think it's not just that they have no data to support it, that there's overwhelming understanding that that's not the case. Because even if they didn't have data, they would still sort of float that idea. But they know they can't. And so they're actually going to try and rewrite the entire history of the Democratic Party and say that it's inconsistent with the Democratic Party to provide a free option of higher education, or to provide government-supported health insurance. This is just bizarre. It's bizarre, and but
it relies on people having a very short historical memory.
Yes, and that is actually a fairly decent bet to make, folks. It's a lot of people starting to, gear up for their Hanukkah and Christmas shopping. Well, apparently now there is a new concern online when you do some online shopping. We're now hearing about e-skimming. Apparently that's when online criminals, cyber criminals, they watch online shopping carts in order to steal credit card and debit card information from websites and mobile apps. Other information captured includes names, date of birth, account numbers, passwords, and location. Now, not everybody can do what I do, which is have 14 different email addresses and a series of rotating passwords so that if someone found the password for one email, they couldn't possibly figure out what to do with it. But targeted businesses...
booking your shows by accident.
Yeah, not everybody else wants to go around...
Going live
exactly.
on YouTube.
Not exactly.
Can you email Adam Green, hacker?
Targeted businesses include retailers, ticket selling sites, travel-related companies, and more. Every time you bank, every time you browse online, you're vulnerable to cyber criminals, or at least you can be. And you've heard me talk about LifeLock. They were a pioneer in identity theft protection. Now Norton, which was a pioneer in consumer cybersecurity back in the day, they've joined forces, LifeLock and Norton, to help protect your cyber safety. A Norton 360 with LifeLock membership provides an all-in-one protection with device security, identity theft protection, a VPN for online privacy, and more. If there's an identity theft problem, they have specialists who will work to fix it. No one can prevent all cybercrime. No one can prevent all identity theft or monitor all transactions at all businesses. But Norton 360 with LifeLock, it's going to be a powerful ally for your cyber safety. Until December 8th, sign up and get a special offer. You can save up to 40% off your first year by going to norton.com/majority. That's 40% off your first year by going to norton.com/majority. That's 40% off Norton 360 with LifeLock at norton.com/majority. And one of today's sponsors is News Voice. It's the first ever entirely open, crowdsourced, and democratized platform for news. And you can download the app for free at newsvoice.com/majority. Look, the vast majority of news owned by the same 5 huge corporations. It is important for us to always pay attention to where our news is coming from, who owns which media outlets, what predispositions they have, what political biases may be in play, what corporate interests they may have. And that's exactly what News Voice helps you keep track of. News Voice is a free crowdsourced website and mobile app that lets you create personalized news feeds and maintain a clear picture of where your news is coming from and what political slants may exist. It helps you aggregate news from corporate outlets, international outlets, local news, and independent media, giving you access to every side of every story. News Voice is fueled by its community users. They contribute, they fact check, they submit stories, sources that are missing, they upvote stories, they write story summaries. You can also comment on stories, and you can debate politics with other members of the community. Through staying active in the community, you can level up, you earn more perks on the platform. The News Voice Play feature lets you listen to your personal news feed every day. And they do so through their customizable audio news playlist. It's your own personally tailored radio station for news. News Voice is a next-generation news aggregator and social media platform that values transparency, good journalism, and productive political discussions. Get totally free access by going to newsvoice.com/majority. I put a link underneath this video. If you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening to the podcast, it'll be in the podcast description as always. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to be talking to a staff writer from The New Yorker, Andrew Marantz, on his book, Antisocial. Let me even tease this a little better. The guy spent a considerable amount of time with our buddy, Mike Cernovich.
Who's laughing now, Sam? Who's laughing now, Sam? Who's laughing now, Sam? Who's laughing now, Sam? Who's laughing now, Sam?
Wow, that's pretty good. So, of course, that is going to be a topic of our conversation, among others. In fact, the folks that he spent time with, I don't want to say this is an ethnography, but it is partly is like a who's who of people that we mock on a daily basis here. So it's
is Ruben in it?
No, darn. No, this is more a little bit less of the launderers and a little bit more of the actual full on. I don't know what we do.
I'm a launderer.
Yeah,
I guess I launder
some are
things.
literally antisocial online extremist, Techno-Utopians, and the hijacking of the American conversation. We'll be right back after this. On the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program New Yorker staff writer Andrew Marantz on his book Antisocial, Online Extremists, Techno-Utopians, and the Hijacking of the American Conversation. Andrew, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks. Good to be here.
I got to say, now this is sort of exciting for me because we are almost a year to the day maybe it's a year to 2 days, when Mike Cernovich got me fired from, or started the ball rolling on getting me fired from MSNBC. He ultimately failed, or he succeeded, and then I got rehired. But so it's fun for me to talk to you at this time and remember that holiday in my own personal life. But all right, so first off, you start at the deplorable, and the thing that excites me about, at least a part of what you've done here, is it acknowledges something that I think justifies part of what we do here, which is cover a lot of these same folks. Give me a sense of why you decided to sort of immerse yourself in that world. I mean, you did so as a reporter and now as an author, but why?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. I mean, I think, I was conflicted about it ethically, and, you never want to give bad people more attention than they deserve. So I didn't want to, just give people attention just for the sake of it. I wanted to, use it as a test case for what the internet could do to us as a society. So yeah, I didn't want to just go to the deepest, darkest ranges of the internet and just say, what kind of specimens do we have here? And, just hold them up to the light just for the sake of it. I wanted to show, okay, if the internet is built the way it's built, what is that doing to us as a society? And because of, the style of reporting I like to do, I wanted to be around people for a long time and see them as examples of how bad our information ecosystem had become. And they were willing to show me.
And so, I mean, to be clear, so you're saying that the idea was I want to see what I want to spend some time with the input so that I can see what the machine looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And sorry, am I cutting in and out on your end, the sound?
No, you sound good to us.
All right, cool. All right, excellent. So basically, yeah, I wanted to see from both angles. I mean, so the subtitle is Online Extremists, Techno-Utopians, and the Hijacking of the American Conversation, right? So I wanted to see from the tech platform point of view and from the I mean, it's funny because they both call themselves disruptors, right? But I wanted to see from the tech platform's point of view and also from the people, the bigots and trolls and propagandists and whoever who were using the platforms so successfully. There was this kind of, for the first few years of social media, there was this kind of legend, this kind of halo effect that, all that will come from social media is nice things, Arab Spring and democratic revolutions and, social justice and all the rest of it. And this worked to the benefit of these huge megalith corporations that could just sort of say, well, don't worry about anything we do. We're just going to sort of let it all hang out and it'll all ultimately redound to the good and the arc of history will just naturally bend toward justice. And I think around 2014, 2015, a few of us could really see that wasn't quite how things were panning out exclusively. I mean, it was in part, but certainly not exclusively. And so I wanted to kind of see it from both sides, from the, by embedding in a lot of the companies. I spent a lot of time at the offices of Reddit and some time at the other big companies. But I also wanted to see it from the people like, the deplorables themselves, who were very consciously, concertedly setting out to unravel the fabric of our democracy in many ways. I mean, that isn't quite how they would put it, but that's in effect what they were doing. And so, I just sort of said, hey, I'm a journalist. I want to be a fly on the wall and watch you do this stuff. And, some people said no. I mean, Alex Jones said yes and then got cold feet. I mean, there are a lot of examples of people who changed their minds or thought better of it. But most of the people said, yeah, come on in. And I was kind of surprised by that, but I also thought, they're not breaking the rules of these platforms. They're not like Russian state actors. They're not breaking any laws. They're not using any illegal campaign funds to a large extent. I mean, they do sometimes break laws, which we can get into, but for the most part, they're just doing exactly what the platforms are incentivizing them to do, and they're doing it extremely well. So I, spent 3 or 4 years documenting what they were doing. And to your question earlier, sometimes I felt a little transactional about it. Like I worried that they were using me to get more attention or more kind of legitimacy. And that was a constant ethical tug of war that I was working out with myself. But I felt that it was just important to document what they were doing, because if we don't know what they're doing, they can just keep doing it and nobody's even tracking it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, having started my career in, at least in the context of this type of work in AM talk radio, the idea of how much of light we were shining on Rush Limbaugh, are we letting him, blossom, or is it hurting him? I think ultimately it's the only way to deal with this problem. And then one of the advantages I think I have is that I have not the credibility to give a platform to someone like this in the same way that, frankly, the New Yorker is. So it's less of a dilemma, I think, in my mind. Although I think that it's a tough nut to sort of crack. I think it also has to do with your approach on how you report on them, right? Like, in what context. I mean, frankly, there's a big difference in my mind between Barry Weiss sort of allowing to the narrative to be taken over by the IDW, let's say, like as if there's an intellectual dark web, versus sort of saying like, this is what this guy is doing and people can see the problems on it.
Yes. I think the manner in which you report on stuff is hugely important. And I think the tone of it, the context, how you frame it, these are all choices. I mean, people often make out to be a binary thing. Do you shine a light on dark things or do you not? And I just don't think the binary gets you very far. I mean, just to take the most extreme example, a lot of reporters have to report on ISIS, and they don't sort of take it as a binary choice to say, well, should we report on ISIS or should we not report on ISIS? I think everybody would see that as a false choice. You do it carefully. You try to do it without replicating ISIS propaganda in any kind of nefarious way. You try to, keep hostages' names out of your reporting for their own safety. You just take an array of ethical considerations in mind. And I think with this stuff, with the alt-right, with online bigotry, with trolling and all these things, it's a little more complicated, right? It's literally closer to home. It's a little more confusing. These people, as opposed to someone like an ISIS who's, really championing how evil they are in a kind of like novel and shocking way. A lot of times what people in movements like, a lot of neo-fascist movements will do is try to cloak themselves as normal or as the guy next door or, just messing around and just in it for the lulz or whatever. And that, I think, puts an even higher onus on reporters to go in with a lot of nuance and a lot of complexity and not get tricked and not let their readers get tricked. And there's a whole array of ways that works. And I had to study up because I really was worried about being used or getting it wrong. And there are a bunch of things I did to get up to speed. But one thing, you were talking about the difference in what kind of platform you're giving someone. I think there's even a difference, among quote unquote sort of mainstream legitimizing media where, the New Yorker and the New York Times are different places. The New York Times has a specific kind of paper of record kind of voice. The New Yorker has its own voice, but it's not, you don't have to be as kind of studiously neutral in the same way. You can sort of say more of what you mean. Now, you're not going to come out like, Gawker and just call someone, some aspersion or some name in a way that doesn't feel grounded by the context. But if somebody does something stupid or racist, you can say in the text, I thought this was stupid or racist. And I did take the liberty of doing that. So I don't, I didn't feel that I was in this trap with this book where I said, well, I have to give equal voice to all sides and I have to just, report the facts and there's nothing else I can do. And I think a lot of the people, whether you're talking about, anyone in the book, Gavin McInnes or, James O'Keefe or any of the people, Mike Cernovich, and even down to the more just overt kind of anti-Semite Nazi people, they sort of, I don't know what they were thinking exactly, but I think they were partly just, used to my presence because I was around so much. But I think they were also kind of thinking, well, look, this guy doesn't make stuff up. He reports the facts. And as long as he doesn't quote us incorrectly, we'll probably be fine. And I don't know, maybe they weren't quite reckoning with the fact that I could also sort of layer my arguments and opinions in there, and that I wasn't just hampered by some kind of old-fashioned notion that all I was allowed to do was quote their words and not offer my own analysis.
Well, I mean, and maybe we're getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I want to anyways. How, when you want to, like, because you sat down, and we should say, like, these people, and I think you acknowledge this, are sort of the at least the intellectual disciples of Andrew Breitbart, or at least they're within that tradition where Breitbart's whole thing was politics are downstream from culture. Right. He was also a guy who had, as far as I could tell, no ideology, or at least no ideas that were about conservative policies beyond the fact that I think the cool kids wouldn't let him hang out with him in L.A. And he felt like he was shut out of the cool kids, what he perceived liberal Hollywood elite. And that became sort of the bedrock of everything he did. This crew, in some way, are disciples of him, and others too, like Ben Shapiro, who doesn't get so much attention from you. But just speak to that for a moment, and then I want to ask you about whether these people are that. How much of it is that they are just so celebrity hungry that they're convinced that any press is good press, and they're not that concerned with you being there if you're not, if you don't have an overt agenda.
Right. Well, just to take Ben Shapiro, he was in part of that early Breitbart crew. Yep. And so, part of it is I had to be selective. There are so many people that I could have gone down various paths with. And, with people like Shapiro, there were a few other people like this in the book. Really, because these people my goal was to illustrate how social media is specifically an accelerant of this stuff. I mean, the book is called Antisocial for a variety of reasons, but one is that, it's really a book about what social media can do to us to kind of damage our social fabric, in addition to the pro-social things that it can do that everybody is more comfortable talking about. So when I encountered someone, and I think Ben Shapiro kind of falls into this category where, they would have been doing their thing even if social media had never come along. He just would have been doing talk radio, or, and his message would have been the same. He would have been going along, with certain tenets of, I love guns and I love religious freedom and whatever. And, maybe the message would have been a little bit different because there wouldn't have been the same kind of incentives that social media algorithms are constantly giving us to spark as much emotion and rage and fear as possible. Maybe he wouldn't be, shilling for gold in the same way, or maybe he wouldn't be,
He would be, but yes, I know, but I no, your point's well taken. I think the idea is like, you're looking at animals who are specifically animals. You're looking at specifically people who are creatures of social media in some way, and where social media is a but for in terms of their existence. All right, so let's talk about Mike Cernovich. You were sitting with him, if not, I think literally, when he developed the narrative that Hillary Clinton had Parkinson's or something, right? Mm-hmm. Just walk us through that.
Well, so these narratives, I mean, who knows where they are born in the great, morass of the internet sort of collecting conscious. But I was sitting with him, again, because these things are meant to be illustrative examples. I go into my sort of alighting at Cernovich's house in a chapter of the book that I call Reductio Ad Absurdum. So, I know people love, philosophy lectures, but I won't go too deep into it. But basically, a Reductio Ad Absurdum is an example of something where, if the premises had been true from the beginning, you would not have arrived at an absurd outcome, right? So there must be something wrong with the premises. So in this case, the premises that Zuckerberg and Dorsey and all the rest of us were giving were the free speech wing of the free speech party. We're going to open everything up to everyone, and that will ultimately bring us all closer together and make the world more open and connected and change the world for the better. Those were their initial starting premises, and it just so happened that in the process they would accrue unparalleled power and wealth and all the rest of it. I wanted to show that those premises were wrong, and I didn't just want to, go on a screed about it or have an opinion about it because, everybody has opinions about the internet. I wanted to show, okay, who is someone who would not, and I think should not, have the kind of influence they do if not for the flawed and warped premises that we had been fed by the techno-utopian social media founders. And the perfect person I found to illustrate that, I think, was Mike Cernovich. So I went to his house in Orange County and just said, walk me through how you have as much influence as you have. And now...
And let me just, I'm sorry, just, and temporally in terms of his career, because he went from a guy who was a men's rights activist. I guess he was also like a pickup artist type of guy.
Pickup artist, yes, and a kind of freelance lawyer for the Gamergate movement. And
and an anti-date rape activist. Like he was an active date rape denialist.
Yeah, well, and so I go into a lot of this in the book because I think it's useful to know, where people come from. He had a rape charge, I think, around the time of law school. He's a lawyer. He graduated from law school, but he didn't get admitted to the bar for several years because of this rape charge. And he had a first marriage that ended up breaking up essentially because he was having his own kind of private, anti-feminist awakening kind of red pilling experience. And as that was happening, kind of as he was not really able to find work and he was kind of experiencing a lot of cognitive dissonance between blogging about how, men need to be empowered and they can't be enslaved by, the women and the feminist ideology of our times. He was also, not to put too fine a point on it, but his bills were being paid by his wife, who was a high-powered tech employee. So
and then he got like a big chunk of that Facebook cash that she had.
Yeah. So this is one of these things where if I had been writing a novel, I think my editor would have been like, all right, it's a little heavy-handed to have,
right,
your kind of tech social media anti-hero be, literally, bankrolled by someone from the Facebook IPO through a divorce. But, it just so happens that it's true, and I got the court records to prove it. These are not, things that people were handing to me because it's embarrassing. But this is a case study in how tied up in this people can be. How it could be, the thing that is paying the bills and the thing that you've known. I mean, he claims, I think, credibly, to have had dinner at Sheryl Sandberg's house and met all the higher ups at Facebook through his wife, and then to go from that to essentially using these platforms to spark all kinds of little waves of lies and conspiracies and nihilism and retrograde politics. It's just a fascinating turn of events that again is in itself a demonstration of how flawed the principles of social media always were. So that all happens leading up to 2014-ish is when Gamergate happens. I wasn't tracking him then, but I went back and recreated all this stuff. And then when I encountered him was 2016, when it was really the run-up to the 2016 election. And as you mentioned, he really wanted Trump to win and Hillary to lose, partly to trigger the libs and to mess with the snowflakes and whatever, partly because he didn't want immigration into the country and he thought Trump would stop immigration. Another one of these great ironies is that his second wife comes from Iranian descent, even though he is sort of a proud Islamophobe in many ways. So it's just a weird, people are just really, really weird and full of dark, scary contradictions, as becomes clear throughout my reporting on this stuff. So I said to him, hey, whenever I track one of these memes about Hillary is sick, or, video footage of Hillary blinking gets interpreted as her having some kind of stroke, or, just bizarre kind of rumors that people kind of hoping in a kind of freelance propaganda way would damage the Clinton campaign. Whenever I traced one of those things back, chances were that Cernovich had a hand in spreading it, if not inventing it, sometimes both. And this was pre-Pizzagate, but it was that kind of class of stuff. And so I just wrote to him and said, hey, it seems like, you are really influential at spreading this stuff. Influential is a neutral word. It doesn't mean it's good or bad. I mean, in this case, It's bad. It just means it is having an influence on, this massively, crucially important presidential election. And as you pointed out from the Andrew Breitbart dictum about politics being downstream from culture, we might like to think, oh, people's votes are not going to be swayed by some weird random piece of internet detritus that they happen to see about how Hillary Clinton secretly has a neurological disorder. But we don't actually know that to be the case. That's just our hope. We just hope and pray that people's brains won't be swayed by that stuff. But in fact, they often are. So all of which is to say, I sort of said, I want to see how you do this. And he says, yeah, sure, come watch me do it. So I just go to his house, sit there for several days, and then, tracked him for a couple of years off and on after that, and just watched how he did it. So, I mean, he would just sit at his, little kitchen table and open up an iPad with Periscope on it. He would start a Periscope and get about 1,000, 2,000, kind of his hardcore fans into the Periscope, and they would sort of workshop what the hashtag was going to be. I was going to say hashtag of the day, but they would do multiple ones per day. And it would be Hillary's coughing, or, Hillary's bringing in terrorists, or whatever. I mean, whatever the thing was that he thought would create an association, whether it was true or not true, that would make people afraid or fearful or feel some kind of disgust. Any of these visceral, viral emotions. And they would pick a hashtag that they thought would trend. Then they would all swarm over to Twitter and get it trending. And again, none of this is against the rules, even though some people argue that it should be against the rules of Twitter to have a kind of coordinated campaign like that. And then once it's trending on Twitter, as you and your audience well know, then it kind of gives mainstream journalists permission to touch it. And it kind of made them feel like they have an obligation to cover it, because now it's, it's trending. Now it's like a quote unquote objective, thing that people are talking about. And from there, they could just kind of hijack the news cycle and go, okay, now that it's trending, we can get Drudge to talk about it, or we can get Fox News to talk about it. And then from Fox News, it can go to the other networks or whatever. Then it becomes a thing. And then it was basically like I would open the newspaper the next day and see a story and go, yeah, I'm pretty sure that story would not be in the newspaper if not for what I watched Cernovich and his cronies do yesterday.
Now, this pipeline, not dramatically different from what we saw like in the aughts, when you would have right-wing blogs do this, and that would get to Drudge, and then Drudge, and then you had some producer at ABC starting their day every morning reading what Drudge says, and as soon as Drudge gives it an imprimatur, it becomes at least worthy of reporting. But let me ask you this: how much? Because there's two. I want to go in the direction of a little bit of sort of the platforms themselves, but also about I just want to stay with the MO of Cernovich. Like in my experience with him, I think he had Posobiec go through. I think he at one point he had said this to somebody in an interview, that he hired Posobiec to go through my Twitter feed, use the search term rape, found a tweet that I put out in 2009 slamming Roman Polanski, really actually people who were apologizing for Roman Polanski by suggesting that, if my daughter's ever raped, I hope it's by someone with a great sense of mise en scène, as a way of slamming these people. And he got Seb Gorka and Donald Trump Jr. to retweet it, and that was basically, it was off to the races at that point. But one of the things I also noticed was that a lot of the people who were retweeting it had no followers and were barely following people. And so simultaneous to this, a buddy of mine just started doing, I don't know if it was on one of those like bot or not websites. And there was a lot of bots. And I wondered to what extent, A, you saw use of this technique, and B, how much, when we look at people like Gavin McInnes, when we look at people like, even Laura Loomer or, folks like Posobiec or Cernovich or Milo Yiannopoulos, how much were you aware or digging into funding sources? Because, I more or less do what these people do on the right. I do this on the left. I'm not as deceitful and I don't lie, but, if someone called me a propagandist, at least with some of the work, I would say, well, I think that's, in a value neutral term, that's correct. My growth would be much bigger than it is now if I was to receive, let's say, here's $300,000, Sam, 2 years ago, and you're going to buy ads, or you're going to buy bots, or you're going to do this. I wonder because, Breitbart got $12 million invested right around the time before he died. That Bannon and that site was not even remotely profitable at that time. You could just go on and you could just calculate the ads. There was no ads on that site when he got that investment. I'm quite sure it came from the Mercers in retrospect, but. How much of that did you see that they were getting funding from anywhere?
Yeah, well, and the Mercers were careful to try to cover their tracks on that Breitbart investment really up until the time that the Senate, I believe it was, forced them to disclose it so that Breitbart could get White House press credentials. And that was one of those things where, just a couple of years earlier, Breitbart was not thinking about what happens when we get White House press credentials. Right. It just shows you what a weird timeline we're in. With the others, so all the people you mentioned are in the book. Loomer, Posobiec, there are many others. Jeff Giese is a kind of funding source for some of the people, but it's not clear that that's continuing. This is a guy who once worked with Peter Thiel and now kind of, he told me that he has funded some of this stuff in the past. But, because a lot of this stuff is smaller scale, a lot of it works by working in concert and kind of being a kind of coordinated effort. It's not like there's one big,
pile of money,
elephant in the room. Yeah. So sometimes it would be, Milo had a kind of mysterious Bitcoin millionaire who was going to be his benefactor, and then that guy died. And, it's a lot of kind of random sources like this. Now, obviously, I was tracking that stuff, and I definitely put in, things that I saw that were suggestive. I definitely, and some of it, some of it made it into the book, some of it didn't. There was, Cassandra Fairbanks, for example, would often sort of say that she was, in constant touch with Julian Assange, and she was going to visit him at the embassy where he was living and DMing with him. And, she seemed on the one hand a little bit fearful about disclosing that, but on the other hand, not that careful about it. So, if Julian Assange is getting, bankrolled by the Russians, then it's possible that people like Cassandra are too. And, she has worked for Sputnik at various times. But the thing that's so weird is that on the one hand, some of this stuff would be really shady and possibly criminal if it was exposed. On the other hand, because of this bizarre timeline we're in, we see criminal activity every day from the White House that nobody seems to care about.
Right.
And if they don't care about it from the president, they're not really going to care about it from a, third string neo-fascist. So it's like they can kind of just do it in broad daylight. I went to a Halloween party in DC with a bunch of the deplorables, and, some of them were dressing up. They're very catty with each other. Some of them were kind of dressing up as each other in kind of, in kind of unkind ways. A lot of them had turned on Laura Loomer at that point, and some of them were dressed up in ways that were meant to mock her, which, I'm not generally in the habit of shedding a lot of tears for vicious Islamophobes like Laura Loomer, but I did feel bad for her in that moment. But then
was this before or after she chained herself to the front door of Twitter?
It was before she chained herself to the front door of Twitter, but it was after she pretended to get her tires slashed on her car. So there were multiple. And again, I try to sprinkle this stuff lightly throughout the book because, as you sort of said earlier, it's kind of in a sense an ethnography of these people, but it's really using them as an example of the larger forces in our society. Right. So there's a lot of drama and intrigue and rumor and all this stuff, but I tried to go easy on that stuff because really, all of these people could disappear from the face of the earth, and some of them, in a sense, have. I mean, Milo and Alex Jones, people like that, once they get wiped out by these platforms, their careers are really over. But I don't want people to rest easy and be complacent in the sense that,
there's new ones growing every day, right?
Yeah,
I mean, there's going to be...
Yeah.
I mean, these guys have a short half-life, but the system that generates them, I think, is there.
Yeah. When the structural incentives are there, they're going to keep growing. But, Cassandra dressed up as, with a buddy, dressed up as Boris and Natasha, and said, haha, the joke is we're Russian spies. And I was like, is that a joke? Or, I mean, you never really know. Some of this stuff is kind of tantalizing / gaslighting if you take it too seriously. But yeah, I think to your larger point that what matters is the system that these platforms are building. It's less this or that individual, and should they be banned, or should they be sanctioned, or should they be quarantined, or should you leave them alone because free speech? Like, those are all debates we can have, but the larger debate is not about the 18 individuals who are in this book. The larger debate is about, are we going to build a better structure so that we're not constantly in this snarl of informational crisis that we can't get out of? Are we going to actually create a movement to make these companies build better systems so that we don't constantly keep running into these problems?
Yeah, let's talk about those systems, because it seems to me that there's a couple of things going on that allow for, this type of stuff, fake news. I mean, particularly in the context of YouTube as well, that there is that's two-part. One, there is a huge financial incentive, right? I mean, it's not like, I think you start off by saying, like, they have this premise of free speech and how it's going to democratize everything. And to some extent, I think there is some truth to that. But it's also, we're building a machine that's going to print money, and the fuel for that printing money is going to be a lot of this stuff. And the game that I think these outlets are playing seems to be, how can we continue to put fuel into this money-making machine and also make it seem to society that we're trying to curb that problem, which is actually driving a lot of the profits?
Yeah, and specifically the fuel of the machine, I think the central thing for people to keep in mind above all else is that these platforms run, as they're currently designed, around emotional engagement, at what social scientists call activating emotions. So it's not just, if you have good content or if you, really blow people's minds. There's a very specific way of doing this that has been studied by scientists and by, content producers alike. And it's not like there's anything inherently wrong with getting people excited or wowing them, or, like, as you said earlier, it's not like there's anything really wrong with opinionated journalism that some people could call propaganda. That's not the problem. The problem is not that there are people with, really colorful opinions out there. The problem is that these systems are built, it's not a level playing field. They like to pretend that they're just sort of holding up a mirror to the national discourse, but they are warping the mirror. I mean, it's like a casino company saying, well, we're just providing a service because people really want to, have fun playing on slot machines. But, like, that's obviously disingenuous. They've designed a whole system where, they don't have windows, so you never know what time it is, and they pump the air full of oxygen, and they give you free drinks, and they do all these things to incentivize you to stay, even if you are a gambling addict who's going to lose your house because, you can't find a way to get out of the casino. And then they turn around and say, well, it's on you, it's your free will that led you into this scenario. So it's not like individual agency has no role to play in this. Obviously, there are some people who are better at, not having social media destroy them and warp their brains. But as a society, what it's doing to us collectively is pretty scary. So, look, I think all things being equal, it's obviously better not to censor people and not to shut down speech. I mean, I'm a journalist. I really love the First Amendment. All that sort of is stipulated, but it doesn't mean that because you love free speech, you don't pay attention to the incentives. And the incentives here are for people to spark the easiest lizard brain emotions they can, because those are the things that go viral. And when you have a system that's literally built around giving people more points if they are more scary or more tittillating or more suggestive or more shocking, you're putting a finger on the scale.
I mean, is it possible to have these type of like behemoths essentially without that?
Yeah, totally. They would just maybe make a little bit less money. I mean, it's sort of like, is it possible to have, McDonald's, source their potatoes more ethically and, maybe make them, not so terribly bad for you? It's possible. It just means that they might lose out on the competition to Burger King or whatever, and they just don't have any incentive to do it.
Well, that's what I mean, though, is that like, yes. And if it's possible I could fly if I had wings. I mean, I'm asking if it's that type of scenario. Like, if a company that has the freedom to do what it's doing, is it possible, based upon the structure that we have, you want to call it capitalism or whatever, to actually do these things that are contrary to maximizing profit?
It's hard, right? I mean, given the way capitalism works, it's hard to move the needle on a big company. Now, I think, the McDonald's analogy is maybe even less pointed than it should be, because it's almost like if McDonald's owned, 98% of the market share instead of, 60% or whatever they own. I don't know what the real numbers are, but, it's like as if Wendy's and Burger King and all these other competitors were really, really, so far down the chain. Look, I mean, McDonald's serves more salads and things than they used to. I think you can move the needle that way by creating consumer demand and creating movements and, making customers, push for more things that they want. You can also
but can it come? I guess what I'm saying is, can it come from that direction, or does it have to be that we need to either make these companies fundamentally different in their structure through antitrust, or regulate them like we would, I don't know, National Grid, but even more, I think, rigorous in some respects?
Yeah, I think that government definitely has a role. It's really tricky, right, because of the First Amendment. So you can't just have the government step in and have some, ministry of truth that tells people what is or isn't true. Obviously, nobody wants that. In a way, it's almost more like the food analogy, where you do have an FDA and it's hugely imperfect, but you are regulating to make sure that McDonald's can't put arsenic in their hamburgers, or that, if they have a salmonella outbreak, how to put that, how to contain that and who to punish for it. So there's that basic level of just sort of safety and regulation, which we don't have on the internet. So that would be a good first step. And then there's also a cultural awareness. I mean, like, maybe the better analogy here is the tobacco industry. Tobacco industry had no incentive to not, addict everyone they could to cigarettes, including, 9-year-olds, getting them hooked on bubblegum flavored, vape pens or whatever. But the needle did move with the tobacco industry. Again, it's not perfect and the problem hasn't been solved. But I mean, there's been a huge amount of cultural progress in the last 20 years. Some of that has been from government regulation, but some of it has been, as you say, from the ground up, from just the cultural understanding that smoking is gross and it's not cool. Like I don't want to be naive about it.
But that came from basically proving that they had engaged in fraudulent practices, right? Like that that came from a massive settlement, funding, that cultural change came from funding from a massive settlement that was a function of proving that the tobacco executives knew that they were causing these deaths. And I don't know that we have that same, I mean, I guess maybe we could get to that point with a Google. I guess what I'm asking is like, when we talk about government regulation, like we could say, and I guess this is your food analogy, you need to stop using algorithms as a way of moderating in these different silos. If you want to use algorithms when it comes to, and they do this, right? Like I just saw some TikTok that was pulled down because a woman was pretending to do an eyelash video, and in between, showing girls how to do thicker eyelashes with an eyelash scissors or whatever that is. She was talking about the Uyghurs in China and asking people to protest against that. And TikTok was able to pull it down. I don't think they should.
And that's an example of how scary things can get. And TikTok is owned by a Chinese company that has no respect for free speech at all. So this is where I think the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world have their best argument. And they make it a lot these days. You'd rather have us doing it because if not, China's going to do it, and they're going to do it with no respect to human rights. Now, I don't think that means that Mark Zuckerberg can just do whatever he wants, but I do think he's right in the sense that you don't want some dictatorial government with no accountability making these decisions. I certainly don't want the Trump administration making these decisions. So, it's tricky, right? You don't want to just sort of say, okay, everything that is bad gets shut down on the internet. I mean, I think obviously we can see what a slippery slope that leads to. I think that, I guess my thing when people bring up the slippery slope that I just brought up of, well, if you censor one thing, aren't you going to censor everything else? I don't discount that, but I guess I just would like to raise the other slippery slope, which is what if you do let all these people speak? People talk about if you censor Nazis' right to march in public, you're going to censor me next. But what about the slippery slope that happens when you do let Nazis speak in public? I think it's worth worrying about both scenarios. Maybe it's just because I like worrying about everything. But
right, I share that fear. But I mean, right now, let's be honest. I mean, we're on the slippery slope. There's never a time you're not. I mean, I can look at my YouTube numbers right now, and I can see that over the past 6 to 8 months, the number of people who find my videos because they're subscribed to me versus the how YouTube suggests it to people has dramatically shifted. 8 months ago, 9 months ago, it was almost 50-50. In fact, 10 months ago, it was 60% suggested, 40% subscribers. It has more than flipped. It is now about 70-30. And that is because YouTube, when people are now looking for a specific topic, they'll go to MSNBC. YouTube will push MSNBC or CNN. I mean, any YouTube user, has noticed this, that the corporate news medias are pushed forward. Prior to us. And so Google's already making that decision. They're just doing it on a different type of I guess, plane, right? Like they're just doing it on based upon like what corporate sources are more reliable than independent sources in some way. We're talking about, it's not like there's a huge amount of reporting that we're talking about in these instances. A lot of it's commentary. And so Google's already doing it, it seems to me. It's just a question of just like forcing them to use people, because a lot of it seems to me, and you would have a better sense of this, having been in these offices, is that they don't want to spend the money or even set the precedent that they would have humans do this stuff who can make assessments that are a little bit more rational than machines.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, it's, the sort of the tech mindset is, humans aren't scalable, they're annoying, you have to pay them, you have to give them bathroom breaks. It's like, it's much easier to just have, machine learning or artificial intelligence do it. And yeah, as you are pointing out, there are huge limitations to what artificial intelligence can do. I mean, obviously people aren't perfect either. There's no perfect solution to any of this, but humans have to be involved at some level. And that is an inefficiency or a friction point, to use the tech terminology for it, which, again, like this is where this is where I do think that sort of basic expectations matter of these companies. Part of it is a structural thing just in the sense of how big they are. Like, this is where I think there's a lot to be said for the kind of, Elizabeth Warren / Louis Brandeis way of thinking about the curse of bigness. Like, Google making its own unilateral decisions, as you say, it's sort of just the company doing it on its own. But one thing that makes that, if not unique, then really unusual, is that they are just such a quasi-monopolistic power that it's almost like, and this is a case with Amazon too, and in many cases it's the case with Facebook too, that, by biasing, they own so much of the infrastructure that by biasing the infrastructure, they're really warping things more than any other company would be able to. So it's not only like McDonald's changing its menu, it's like McDonald's owning the roads and being able to suggest which exit you get off and then putting a McDonald's right at that exit. I mean, it's like a much huger chunk of the infrastructure that they're able to control. So I think in that sense, there's a good argument for breaking some of these companies up. But I also don't think that antitrust action, even if it could be taken, would get you all the way there. I mean, Facebook has already been fined $5 billion by the FTC last year. It was the biggest fine in FTC history. And immediately the analysis was like, oh, not a big deal. Facebook will pay that without blinking.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think there's government action that could be huge and unprecedented and could be still not enough. And this is where, people sort of think of it as kind of, soft-headed or naive or whatever to talk about cultural change. And I see that. But I also think that cultural change is a huge part of this. I mean, it's a feedback mechanism, right? You have governmental change because you have cultural change and vice versa. And so I think part of it is, when I was sitting in the offices of some of these companies, sometimes they would make decisions because if we don't do this, we're going to get sanctioned by the government. But often it would be, we're going to get hit really hard in the press, we're going to have users defect, or we're just going to feel like lepers and pariahs when we go walk around San Francisco. I mean, don't forget, like, these people care a lot about their legacies. These tech bros, they, I call them, sort of riffing on the Michael Lewis term for bankers, I call them big swinging brains in the book. I mean, they really want to be seen as the brainiest, most luminary, most forward-thinking people. They want their names on buildings. They want to have great legacies, like, Bill Gates, the philanthropist. And so that's not the only leverage point, but I really think we underestimate what a leverage point that is, the kind of appealing to their ego and their desire to be seen as vectors for positive social change. And if everyone in the world thinks that you are on the wrong side of history, that's a powerful motivating force to do something better. I'm not naive enough to think that that's all you need, but I think we discount it too much sometimes. I guess we'll find out. I prefer to see them all just split up into very small pieces, but and I think it'll be easier at that point for any cultural changes to happen. The book is Antisocial, Online Extremists, Techno-Utopians, and the Hijacking of the American Conversation. Andrew Marantz, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Yeah, this is great. Thank you. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, head to the fun half of the program. Folks should read the book. I could have talked to them for a long time. Apparently, a lot of those folks who were a lot of like the neo-fascists, and I think he has categories of people in the book that run from, let's see, alt-right to alt-light to full-on Nazis. And he says a lot of these people actually came from, which is not to say, I don't want anybody to interpret this, but that's a lot of these people come from the Libertarian anti-war movement, and they became a little bit disenchanted with Trump for this. A lot of those people have gone to Tulsi. Now, you know. Damn. That's I don't know that means anything other than that it's a description of where these people are at. But
well, there is a difference between being an isolationist and an anti-imperialist.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. But interesting stuff. And it is the near 1 year anniversary or 2 year, I should say, I guess now. Mike Cernovich. And I don't know where Cernovich is now. I guess he's making documentaries and presenting them on Dave Rubin's Blaze show. I'm not sure, but
Who's laughing now, Sam?
I still am. Folks, a reminder, this show relies on you for its support. Not on the Mercers, not on those other dudes, not on my ex-wife's Facebook stock options. It relies on you, our audience. So you can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. I feel like I should put a new membership level, which is my ex-wife's not a Facebook executive level. But I don't know. That seems a little cumbersome. I don't think that would fit on a t-shirt. But you can go to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you support this program. You get extra content. You get the free show without commercials. And you get the that warm, fuzzy feeling of supporting this program. Also, don't forget to sign up for the AM Quickie. You can do so at amquickie.com, or you can just get the Majority Report app. And it is living now. The AM Quickie, in addition to the Majority Report, live on the Majority Report app. You can check it out at majorityapp.com. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Normally, I would tell you to use the coupon code MAJORITY and get 10% off, but now you don't need to for this up until near Christmas time. I'm not sure how long it's going, but 30% off as we speak. Great time to try various types of Just Coffee. Go in, maybe buy a 5-pound bag or do a bunch of 1-pound bags. Try out the Majority Report. Try some other blends. All at justcoffee.coop. Today is Tuesday. However, it's not a normal Tuesday because of what happened last night. Michael.
We had a really amazing TMBS last night. I'm very proud of what we're doing. We had on the great Nina Turner. That was incredibly fun and inspiring, obviously, as anybody who's familiar with her work in politics or on the campaign trail. And then Milton Alamati, who's the founder and publisher of Black Star News, returned. We talked about the competing colonial visions between the United States, France, and China in the continent of Africa, and how that relates to Samir Amin's work on building a post-colonial world. And we did an illicit history of the NATO invasion of Libya. We talked about the UK elections. We did a lot. Go watch the full show on the Michael Brooks Show channel on YouTube and get everything, including this weekend's primer on housing justice and the Green New Deal with Megan Day, patreon.com/TMBS.
Jamie.
This week on the Antifada, Sean and Andy went across the pond and recorded an episode with the lads and lass of Trash Future, which is a very funny podcast out of London. They talk about the upcoming UK elections, the deep insecurities at the center of posh life, which are motivating Boris Johnson's political career, the Lib Dem and Chuck Cucks, and Corbyn's cheeky plan to nationalize Nando's and put Mr. Bean on the dole. Also, we have a bonus.
They love Nando's over there.
I don't even know what that is. I'm just reading the description that Sean
I love it. Nationalizing it would be a big deal.
All right. Cool. We also released a patron bonus for all of our wonderful subscribers on Friday. It is a real Lib Dem Hours, also with Trash Future, wherein they read a dystopian fanfic by one James Kirkup called How the Lib Dems Could Seize Power, and they have a little bit of fun with it. Patreon.com/theantifada.
And check out Matt's podcast, Literary Hangover, at patreon.com/literary hangover. Matt has himself an actual hangover, and so he's not in today. All right, folks, quick break. See you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's a good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths, 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
I think I might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey! Shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
we are in fact back, ladies and gentlemen. It is the Majority Report. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. It's John from San Antonio.
Whoa, John, what?
Yeah, I got a.
Yeah, hold on for 1 second. I don't know what's going on. Whoa, that was
He's
weird.
calling from the hallways of always.
Let's try this again. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this?
Good afternoon, Sam. This is John from San Antonio.
All right, no feedback. What's up? John!
Yeah, most long-time... All right, good to call.
Yep.
Yeah, most long-time listeners of this show know me as an extremely enthusiastic Bernie Sanders supporter, and when you asked me to be on the Majority Report election night coverage in 2016, I asked you if I could do a report on the then fledgling revolutionary movement, and I was happy that you let me promote this great organization. I've been consistently promoting progressive Dan ballot candidates through the years. We're 69 days till the Iowa caucuses and 99 days until Super Tuesday, and I'm very happy to see a Bernie mini surge in the poll. And I hope
John, all right, hold on 1 second. I want you to pick up in a second. But I was convinced with the way that you made that introduction that you were going to say, which is why it pains me now to tell you that I've become a conservative or something like that.
Right. I was getting ready.
You set it up in a way that there was going to be some type of twist.
Like I misunderstood the price mechanism.
Well, there's a slight twist, but I mean it's nothing like you're saying.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. So continue. I'm sorry. Pick it up. You were saying there's a surge that Bernie's having a mini surge of sorts in the polls.
Yeah, I think so. And so in recent history, we've seen Obama in 2008, Kerry in 2004, have a surge in December, and this has led them to the nomination. So I've talked about a brokered convention since January, and right now I feel the possibility is stronger than ever. The first ballot this year only deals with pledged delegates that are determined by voters. These votes are determined by each congressional district and state totals. The ratio from each state is between 65 to 75% for congressional districts and 35 to 25 for state totals. The key factor is that for a candidate to get delegates, they must get 15% in each congressional district or state totals to receive any delegates. To win on the first ballot, that candidate needs 50% plus one delegate, or a total of 1,990 pledged delegates. So YouGov has released 4 different projections from polling in all of the states due Super Tuesday, which count for a total of 38% of the total pledged delegates. So since the 15% rule is in place, we're going to have a lot of wasted votes. So unless there is an unlikely surge by any candidate other than Bernie, Warren, or Biden in McKenzie Pete in Iowa, in New Hampshire, a Laba Chair in Minnesota, there's a lot of those votes are just going to be, completely wasted. So I want to encourage, Tulsi and Yang voters, that they should realize that even in their best polls, they're nowhere near the 15% threshold. And if they want to vote for a candidate that has a chance to win, they need to vote for Bernie. So one thing that's been consistent in all 4 projections of the YouGov polls, these projection polls, is that the number for the pre and Super Tuesday states, there's no candidate that's been able to win on the first ballot. So if the super delegates come into play, they will determine 17% of the total vote, and unfortunately that will help Warren. But whoever is leading the delegate count between Bernie and Warren, combined delegates, they will win on the second ballot or later. This is consistently shown in every YouGov delegate projection. The candidate who has less delegates, if they're able to concede and endorse the other candidate and encourage their delegates to vote for the leading vote getter on the second or later ballot, they will win. So in the latest YouGov poll, Biden's at 42% of all pledged delegates, which is the best showing so far. And if Bernie and Warren, can't get 15% in House seats and state totals in the South, Biden can win on the first ballot. So I'm hopeful that the other centrists like McKenzie Pete and, I don't think like the Deval Patrick or Bloomberg are going to get any delegates at all. But it would actually help Bernie or Warren for them to get delegates to split that centrist total. So actually what they're doing is actually helping Bernie or Warren, and they think that they're hurting. They think that they're propping up centrists, but what they're doing is actually helping Bernie or Warren. So I encourage Bernie voters to phone bank, knock on doors, give money, promote Bernie on social media, and I'm disappointed in Warren's shift on Medicare for all, and it's fair game to talk about policy, but Bernie supporters should not vilify Warren or unfairly compare Warren to other centrists, because it's highly likely if Bernie wins the nomination, he will very likely need Warren delegates to win, and vice versa. So if you want to comment, go ahead.
No, I think, I agree with your assessment. And the only thing I would add is that, and I appreciate the call, John. I agree with your assessment. I think there is a strong likelihood if things stay the same. The polling, it's hard to know how indicative of the polling is, and it's hard to know how what happens in Iowa will change the polling in subsequent states. It's hard to know if Bernie's theory of organizing is going to bring out voters that the polling may not, capture. We just don't know. But I think the dynamic, at the very least, of what you're talking about, that if Bernie wins, it's going to have to be with support from Warren voters. And if Warren wins, it's going to have to be from support from Bernie voters. I think is as true today as I thought it was, the day they both announced entering into the race. I think there is, we see it every day. Barack Obama's coming out, and when he says that he's going after Bernie, I'm sure that he's also going to be going after Warren, frankly. When Mike Bloomberg enters into the race, I'm not convinced, and I appreciate the call. I'm going to let you go, John. But let's talk about Mike Bloomberg.
Thank you.
Thanks. Let's talk about Mike Bloomberg for a moment. A lot of speculation. Why is Mike Bloomberg in this race? Why is Deval Patrick in this race? I think they obviously have their own strategies. I think they also would be like, yeah, if I can win, I will win. I will become president. That would be great. But I also suspect that when... Oh, yeah, hold on for 1 second. Sorry. He wasn't going to let go. I also suspect there's more to Mike Bloomberg's... I don't think a guy like Bloomberg gets into the race with one idea of what can happen. And here is Mike Bloomberg's campaign manager. Now, I don't know if this guy was a reporter covering Mike Bloomberg's possible entry 6 weeks ago into the race. Is he not, or was he? I don't know. There's so many Bloomberg reporters now that have been hired that it really be interesting to go back and read what they were saying at the time. Because I know how that precedent was set when Sirota got the job. How that was problematic because he was on Twitter a lot supporting Bernie Sanders. But this is a clip number.
I believe Kevin Sheekey worked for Bloomberg before he was a Bloomberg journalist. So in other words, I think he's a
well. I don't think he was
political
actually a journalist.
consultant.
I don't think he was ever a journalist.
Went to write for Bloomberg
Is
as
that
a
right?
columnist.
Did he?
Oh yeah, Sheekey's I'll double check, but I'm certain he's a long-term consultant for Bloomberg.
Regardless, that's not the point. Here he is. He's on with Kate Baldwin. What? Well, it's just not. I don't know. It's
spelled weird.
Kate
Baldwin. It's Ouin.
It is spelled
on
the French
CNN. Yes, and. Here's the thing. You need a certain threshold of donations to get on stage in the debate. And that doesn't seem to bother Mike Bloomberg's team, who has decided that he's not going to take any donations. He's just going to fund the whole thing himself.
Bernie Sanders, when he says that is why multi-billionaires like Mike Bloomberg are not going to get very far in this election because we do not believe billionaires have the right to buy elections. What do you say?
Hey, listen, Bernie can run his campaign. We're going to run our campaign. We're going to get our message out. I have, all the respect in the world. He's going around raising money. The other candidates are going around raising money.
How do you get on the debate stage? You can't raise money. If
we can't.
Are you accepting contributions?
We will respect the process. Mike will accept no contributions.
So you're not going to make any debate stage?
Not until the DNC changes their rules, and we'll respect them until they do.
Now, I got news for you. There's no way the DNC is going to change their rules. And there's no way Mike Sheekey, who was the company's chief Washington lobbyist and then the campaign manager of his mayor race, and then later. So he's always been in government. I don't think he's been a reporter. But there's no way. I mean, he knows the DNC is not going to change their rules.
Well, what if they think he's the only candidate who could stop Bernie?
They're
not going to change their rules, and you say that is actually a smart thing for Bloomberg.
Of course.
Break that down.
They know they're not going to change their rules. And the last thing that Michael Bloomberg wants is to be on stage with an array of Democrats pointing out the fact that he has a history, that he has a record, that his positions are in every way other than not liking Donald Trump, inconsistent with the Democratic Party, even probably some of the more so-called moderate or conservative people like Mayor Pete. Mike Bloomberg does not want to get on a stage when other people get to ask him a question. He has billions of dollars, and his whole plan is to roll this out with as much questioning as you get to question Crest or Colgate or, a soap product. And he wants to roll it out, and he wants to be able to brand it, and he wants no one to be able to question it. And here's the thing. He's starting this campaign. He's not going to be in the Democratic debates. This is not someone who is looking to win the Democratic primary. This is someone who is setting up a potential third-party run. That is it. He may not do it, but I would bet that if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, what Mike Bloomberg is doing right now is not running to beat him in the Democratic primary. He's running right now to set himself up to make the decision to run in the general election. That's why he's entering now. If you think about it in those terms, why is Mike Bloomberg entering the race now? It's because he's entering the general election now. And he has the ability at the end of this Democratic primary to step back and say, I'm not going to.
The party was too extreme. They kept asking me to apologize.
He threatened in
stop and
2016
frisk.
to do this. He threatened in 2016. And there's no reason to think that that threat is not in effect right now. And so what he's doing is he is entering the race, the general election. Let's go back to the phones. Calling from a 763 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Max. I'm calling in from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Max from Minneapolis, Minnesota. What's on your mind, Max?
Well, a lot of things right now, actually. I think I emailed you guys the other night. I said I was asking about whether or not you guys still did the whole debate, the, what was it, Libertarian Anarcho-Capitalist thing.
Sure. So what do you got?
Whatever you got to throw at me. People have asked me why I'm an anarcho-capitalist, why I think this is a good ideology, why I like it so much.
Okay. Can I just say before you start, you cannot have both of our words at once. You have to choose one. Either you're going to take anarchist or libertarian from us, from the far left, I mean.
No, you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. You can explain to us now. All right. So okay. So why don't you explain to us what these are? What is a libertarian anarcho-capitalist?
Well, it's where somebody is allowed to have the freedom of the state to whatever means necessary, and someone can just basically do whatever they want in a organized boundary where they're not allowed to let anybody in or anybody out without any sort of regulation.
Okay, what's the who's going to organize these boundaries?
The hierarchical society.
And how is that hierarchical society that is stateless now? How is that going to work?
Well, it's capitalist. It's one of the few things carried over from a capitalist society.
So the one thing that so what you imagine is that basically our leaders will be the richest people in the country, and they will organize things for us.
That's what capitalism is. It's anarchy, wherein people are allowed to buy whatever they want at whatever asking price they are asking for. It's basically a haggling system as you can have in, say, the diasporas or the cities in Israel. When I went there, it was you would say, I want
in the shuk. In the shuk.
Yes, like that. The markets, the bazaars. When you would go there, you could ask. They would ask 500 shekels for a soccer jersey, and you could say, well, I want to pay 350, and you could start haggling from there. You could say, well, you could say 475 for like 450.
No, I understand. I understand how haggling works. Now, so wait a second. So in the society you imagine, Max, what if the richest person, right? Let's say, because as we transition into your version of the society, right? Like the capitalists who have all the money, they're going to be the ones who organize everything, correct? As you said, they're going to be the organizers because this is the hierarchical society that you're talking about. What if they say like, hey, guys, I have $1 billion. Guess what? I just bought the shuk. And all you little guys, bye-bye. And now Max goes in to bargain with this one owner, and he says, I want that soccer jersey. And the guy says, 500 shekels. And Max says, I want to pay 300 shekels. And the guy says, all right, goodbye. Good luck buying it somewhere else because we've cornered the whole thing.
Well, then I could just buy it somewhere else. It's not.
Max, I just said they've bought it all up. They've bought out every other little stall that's there. Those little tiny stalls, they couldn't compete with this billionaire. So where do you get the shirt now, Max?
You buy it anywhere else, I guess.
Well, I just told you there's no other stores. He's got a monopoly. Max?
You
still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
So, dude, what do you do?
I'm just listening to the people in the background. What's up?
Well, those guys.
You have a wonderful day, bro, and I'll see you again soon.
No, forgive Michael, please. He is rude. He is rude.
I got something in my eye. It has nothing to do with this.
Listen,
I'm not listening, believe me.
Max, I'm asking you, what do you do now?
Well, then, I can. Well, one, I could either revolt. I could shut down his market. I could try.
How are you
going to
shut down his market? He's got $1 billion. You got what? $150? You got the 300 shekels?
Throw it. That's the beauty of an anarchistic society. I could throw it over.
Stop using our word that's not your word.
Wait a second. How would you throw over that?
Oh my. What do you mean? Oh my God. Anarchistic is not like. You're saying hold on. You're claiming anarchy as a word.
No. All right, listen, don't get distracted by that.
No. You can't just claim a word like that. This isn't like.
You're right.
Politics.
You're right. She cannot. I agree. Now let's get back to the scenario we were talking about. Let's say like how would you overthrow, let's say, Bloomberg News?
Just assassinate the guy.
Oh, okay. I understand that. I understand what you're saying now. So this is going to lead in your anarcho-capitalist world. The way it's going to work is monopolies and then assassinations.
Yeah.
All right. Cool world, man. Do we get jetpacks?
No.
I didn't think so. All right, buddy. I appreciate the call. Thank you.
Such appropriation. It's really triggering for me. All right. Remember, folks, and caps or whatever you want to call yourselves. It's a culture, not a costume.
This is not beanbag.
Anarchists oppose hierarchy. The more you know.
Stop it. Knock it off.
I mean, listen.
By the way, no, to be fair, can I just say, most legit answer to that question I've ever heard.
Right.
I mean, everybody else is just like, I'd ask them, they want to meet. We could have a free exchange of ideas. Assassinate them. Okay.
I will say,
it's not what I want, but that was by far the
also,
most intelligent answer I've heard to that question.
And that's why I had to basically wrap up the conversation because I really don't have a response to someone who is suggesting we can develop a political system that would be based on monopolies that would be dealt with by assassination. I mean, that is, I can't really argue.
You're cornered.
Right.
You're cornered.
It's like agree to disagree on what kind of world you want.
Exactly. If we're not
500 shekels, eh? Watch your back at the souk.
Oh shoot!
It's hard to argue when you can't agree on the basic terms.
Less concerned about the direction of the conversation, it would have been really like, how do you go about organizing the assassinations when all of the private death squads are owned by the same billionaires?
Well, I'll tell you how you do that.
How do you get to the assassinations when there are no roads?
Nice.
That's how you do it. You get Bourne to do it.
Wait, so then Jason Bourne is operating as some type of like social service worker for people that aren't billionaires. That doesn't sound very capitalist.
Exactly. He is the one. That's the one thing you need is the pro bono social services top assassin spy.
So then they can see, like, I will concede, even though I'm a libertarian, we need a government provision for one thing, which is a Jason Bourne style assassination
squad. Sort of like the Jedi, but not so futuristic.
It sounds lit.
That's actually pretty awesome, dude. That was the best libertarian call I've ever had. Respect.
That was it. I mean, there you go.
500 for this jersey? Oh, really?
So I don't know much.
So fast.
I don't know much about this guy Michael Black at all. In fact, this is, I think, the first time I've heard his name, and I haven't seen him around that much. But he is apparently the DNC vice chair. Now, there was a chair of the DNC, Tom Perez. I don't know what happened.
Teaching at Brown.
Is he? No.
He literally was teaching class.
No, I know he had like
batteries.
a 6-part series, but I don't know that. Like,
occasionally I show up to, at forums. We've got great candidates.
See, he's not been around so much that you can't even do an impression.
I just remember a vague, low energy,
But this guy
is being charged right now.
Democrats are united.
But I got to say that this
we can
is
maybe win.
This is fun. I love the attitude of Michael Black. He's the DNC vice chair, and he's brought on to Fox to address the burning question of the day. Of course, you hear a lot about impeachment because of MSDNC wants to talk about it. And you hear a lot about things like Rudy Giuliani being arrested. And you hear a lot of stuff, obviously, about Act Blue being a huge slush fund for George Soros, of course. But at Fox, they're talking about the real controversy. And that, of course, is whether Michelle Obama is going to jump into the race. Right, exactly. Follow the news professionally and not heard any of this. And they've brought Michael Black, the DNC vice chair, into studio to talk about it.
Obama, let's be honest, is one of the only people who could unite the party's warring factions.
Tucker Carlson with a bold prediction saying Michelle Obama just may be the Democratic ticket next year, despite the former First Lady saying she's not interested. Michael Blake, Vice Chair of the DNC and a New York State Assemblyman. How you doing, Mike? Nice to see you, sir. What do you think of the prediction on Michelle Obama? Would you like to see that?
Well, she's not running, but the core question is why the hell does Tucker Carlson still have a job here in the first place? The reality is this is someone who said white supremacy is a hoax, and why does Fox allow him to still be here in the first place?
All right. Well, I mean, his opinion there is that Michelle Obama may get in this race. Do you think that will happen, or
not going to happen? Not going to happen. But I think the core question is he shouldn't be on here at all.
I get it. We didn't bring you on to talk about Tucker Carlson. I brought you on to talk about the Democratic field.
There you go. Bill Hemmer not having any of it. But guess what? Michael Black, the DNC vice chair, he's having it, and he continues to have it.
We're talking about jobs while Trump is ignoring the truth. We're talking about health care while he's ignoring the truth. And the question must be, for Donald Trump, for Fox News, for other entities.
Listen, I didn't bring you on to bash our network. So with all due respect, why don't we just keep it on topic?
But it's not.
Politico magazine says this, Michael.
Relevant.
Just out. No, it's not.
Well, the Tucker Carlson premise.
It is not relevant to the conversation we're having. Save it for later. Oh. Politico magazine, it says, waiting for Obama. Here's the quote out just a moment ago. With one candidate, he, meaning Barack Obama, pointed out that during his own 2008 campaign, he had an intimate bond with the electorate, especially in Iowa, that he no longer has. Then he added, and you know who really doesn't have it? Joe Biden. End quote there. Your reaction to that?
So, first, it's not appropriate just to say that we can't talk about what we should say. You brought us on to be a guest. Second, the question around the electorate and an effort. One of the reasons you brought me on is that I was a part of the team that organized a successful election in 2008 and thereafter. So when it comes to the coalitions, yes, everyone should be talking about mobilizing coalitions. Black, white, Latino, Native American, Asian, etc. Not just Joe Biden, but all the candidates in the field. We are talking about uniting of races as others are talking about dividing of races. And so it is always appropriate to bring up these issues. It's one of the reasons you brought me on.
The comment was, you know who really doesn't have it? Joe Biden. Do you agree with that quote?
No, because the reality is if we take things just out of context rather than broader conversations, all these candidates are in the field. Even you look at the Fox News polls last week, they're defeating Donald Trump.
There you go. Bill Hemmer was getting a little steamy on that. You know, they don't like it, folks, when you come on and remind the people during the hard news period of the day when they're talking about the real likelihood of Michelle Obama jumping in the race. They don't like it when you bring up stuff about Tucker Carlson saying that there is no such thing as white supremacy. They don't want to hear that.
That's how you do Fox News, folks.
Yeah, exactly. That is, it should be one of those firsts and lasts all rolled into one appearance. I mean, particularly, I mean, look, I can see the argument of different people going on there if you're trying to, if you have the opportunity to reach people. I mean, look, part of the reason why I still go on MSNBC is because they're far more Republican than they used to be. And there's an opportunity to sort of be a voice of dissent. But in the main, I think if you're a politician who's not looking for votes from them, you do what that guy did, and good for him. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, this is nice. Speaking of Michael Bloomberg, here's another reason why Michael Bloomberg does not want to be on a debate stage. Remember, his campaign manager said, well, we're not going to take any donations because Michael Bloomberg is so super wealthy that he could buy this election with one of his credit cards, multiple of his credit cards tied behind their back or whatever, however you would say that. And but Michael Bloomberg, this also provides Michael Bloomberg a shield from any criticism about not participating in the debates. And there's a reason why he doesn't want to, because nearly every one of his positions are completely out of the mainstream of the Democratic Party, even if you are, I don't know, Pete Buttigieg. Here is Michael Bloomberg in 2014, when Michael Bloomberg actually gets admonished by Valerie Jarrett of the Obama administration.
It's difficult to watch the images that we air.
Pause it. I should tell you that this is Israel was bombing at the time Palestinians. And
savage bombing in Gaza that I always have to say was so bad that Joe Scarborough criticized some of it. I mean, like, you can imagine how horrific that has to be.
On our network and other networks, this week a school attack that had thousands in there. It was described as bloody mattresses, children killed who were sleeping next to their parents. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said Thursday, nothing is more shameful than attacking sleeping children. Did Israel go too far?
Israel cannot have a proportional response if people are firing rockets at their citizens. Can you imagine if one of the contiguous countries to America were firing rockets at America? The same people who are criticizing the Israelis would be going crazy, demanding the president does more. Unfortunately, if Hamas hides among the innocent are going to get killed because Israel just does not have any choice but to stop people Hamas firing rockets at their citizens. They have a right to defend themselves, and America would do exactly the same thing.
Doesn't the Geneva Conventions lay out that you cannot attack schools or hospitals?
Nobody's attacking schools or hospitals. We're attacking Hamas. But Hamas is standing in the middle of a hospital. If they're standing in the middle of a hospital and they're firing rockets at your kids, what would you expect us to do? Would you really want us to not try to stop them? And unfortunately, if there are innocents getting killed at the same time, it's not Israel's fault.
The White House called that attack totally indefensible.
It was. But look, this is why we thought the ceasefire was so important. And Secretary Kerry has been working vigilantly at the president's direction to be a constructive force. It's a devastating situation. Israel absolutely has the right to defend itself, and we are Israel's staunchest ally. But you also can't condone the killing of all of these innocent children. And
the idea that this guy, I mean, the idea that that he can selectively interpret what the Geneva Conventions are in terms of attacking and I love how he frames this too, in terms of attacking hospitals or schools. I love how he frames it like innocents are going to get killed, right? It's all in the passive voice. It's not if Hamas is in a hospital surrounded by kids, Israel's going to kill the kids. It's just that they're going to get killed by some force. But within our law, if you know that your actions are going to lead to the death of someone, you have criminal liability. There are rules of war. Not to mention that Gaza is just like one big prison camp, essentially.
And yes, and also that a lot of those assertions are dishonest. I mean, I mean, Hamas is not just, can say whatever you want about Hamas, but they are not just setting up camps in hospitals and schools, primarily because they actually have to govern a population.
Exactly.
Some of these places were UN administered. They're not inviting Hamas in. That's like some type of David Horowitz fever dream, if you believe that. And I'll say in addition to that, I mean, defending basically any Israeli atrocity, like de Blasio would do the same thing. It's standard issue New York politics, and that needs to change structurally. But even beyond that, Bloomberg endorsed George W. Bush twice. He was a fervent Iraq invasion supporter. He presided over this massive spy program against Muslims in the city and stop and frisk, and all of these policing techniques, some of which are actually imported from Israeli policies in the West Bank. I mean, he is
grotesque,
ultra right wing,
and this is why he doesn't want to be on the debate stage.
Absolutely right, because I mean I don't trust any of them at all on these issues, with the exception of Bernie. But I think you're right. I think that the polls are moving enough where at least other people, I mean, Biden, Booker, and Harris, I don't think would, but most of the rest would at least acknowledge as an example, maybe that Netanyahu is an objective, bigot on some level, or isn't corruption charges are a problem. Bloomberg won't touch any of this. And I think, by the way, besides being an oligarch, this is pretty much as genuine as you're going to get for Bloomberg's actual belief system. He's not just posturing.
Yep.
Yeah. And given some of these grotesque views that he holds, don't you think it's possible that he would pull more votes from Trump than Bernie in a hypothetical three-way race?
I don't know if he would emphasize those things, frankly. I think he would run trying to get Republicans who don't like Trump, which is maybe 20%. And then I think he would run trying to get Democrats who are afraid of Bernie, which is, I think, 20% possibly, who might vote Bernie over Trump. And then I think he's going to make an assessment, come August or at the convention, maybe before then. Could he win? Would he throw the race to Trump? And if the answer is, I don't think I'll throw the race to Trump and I could win, I think he's going to run.
I think the thing that makes me feel more relaxed about it is I think where he will pull from either those Democrats that are afraid of Bernie or the Republicans that don't like Trump are New York and California. That geographically, it's good where they're distributed.
Right. From an electoral standpoint, he's probably not going to be competing for potential Democratic votes in, let's say, Wisconsin.
No.
So, I mean,
I wouldn't think so.
But I mean, so we'll see. But I'm convinced that's what his strategy is, and we'll see. If these things change,
I think we have to be, and in Pennsylvania, I think we have to be comfortable with the opposite of Schumer, and which is like, for every suburban voter we lose in suburban Philly, we have to pick up an extra person in Philadelphia itself as an example with extra turnout.
Right.
That's the bet we have to make. But in any progressive scenario, by the way, not just Sanders.
I can imagine that. If I'm Bernie Sanders, and maybe he would even run to stop Warren. I mean, I'm not quite convinced about that he wouldn't do that as well. I'm not convinced that if I was Bernie or Warren running against two billionaires, that I would feel like I may have actually gotten a boost here.
I think it's great for Sanders. I think it's they are the personification of everything Bernie's been talking about for decades.
Yep. Here's Squawk Box. This is this is quite an image, ladies and gentlemen. If you're not seeing this, where does
we didn't have this on?
Oh, it's not on there. Okay, so it's what's his face? Andrew Ross Sorkin and Frank Luntz, the ethically and follically challenged Frank Luntz, who looks like basically Andrew Ross Sorkin is looking into the mirror, but one of those apps that adds like 20 or 30 years to you. One of those filters where you get to look at yourself and older, and it's basically he's looking into the future. But it's pretty amazing. Remember, Frank Luntz is the guy who came up with the Republicans' contract. What was it called? The
Contract with America.
Contract with America. He also was sanctioned by the National Pundits Society, Pollsters Society, for fudging some numbers during that time. And he was in the wilderness for a long time, just eating pasta. I remember that story that we read about him a while back.
Yeah, because he was so sad about the negativity of politics. He was eating bolognese, watching Newsroom.
Yes.
It was the most depressing image I've ever read in my life.
But here he is now, basically coming on to CNBC and having this to say.
How you think the mayor can or can't, I don't know where you land ultimately, capture that enthusiasm gap between the sort of very, very left and this sort of moderate left that he's trying to represent?
Well, first, to respond to Elizabeth Warren, she's trying to buy the election.
Right.
She's offering Medicare for all. She's offering free health care for illegal immigrants. She's offering free college tuition. She's offering free everything. And so is Bernie Sanders. And if that's not trying to buy the election, I don't know what is. Now, as far as Bloomberg,
Well, that is not trying to buy the election. That is offering people a reason to vote for you. That is the way our politics work. Buying the election is when you have so much money that you can come in and overwhelm any message that is presented by any other candidate because you can control all of the media apparatus that exists in this country. That you can control the access to the airwaves. That you can literally drown out any message because of your enormous wealth. That is, the idea that Frank Luntz doesn't know that distinction, I find very hard to believe.
Well, he does know Bernie's name, which is more than a lot of these pundits do.
That's true. That's true. It was very nice of him to bring up both of them trying to buy it. Is there any more to this clip? Oh, let's hear it.
Now, as far as Bloomberg, in South Carolina, Nevada, Iowa, New Hampshire, the first four states, that represents 4% of the Democratic delegates. The week after that, March 3rd, which is Super Tuesday, there will be almost 40% of the delegates chosen. Mike Bloomberg has the money and the time to make a difference in those states. These other candidates are spending tens of millions of dollars on just 4% of the electorate. Bloomberg will have the opportunity to make investments in these other states when all the other candidates are literally bankrupt. That's the positive for him. The negative for him is that Democrats aren't asking for another billionaire to run. They're not giving Tom Steyer, the other billionaire in this race, they're not giving him significant support. To be blunt, Democrats don't like millionaires and billionaires, and it's going to be very hard for Bloomberg to reach that majority. He's going to have to draw upon independents and Republicans who can vote in about half of their Super Tuesday contest.
Although anybody can see the difference between Tom Steyer and Mike Bloomberg. I mean, Frank, it's like it's hard to even say those two names in the same set. They are billionaires, but that's about the only similarity.
Right.
Great analysis by
that's
Joe.
Right. They are billionaires. That's the only similarity. Is there anything more unique that you can be on the planet than a billionaire? I guess, mayor of New York, there's probably, maybe mayor of New York is pretty unique.
Yeah. UN Secretary General.
Yeah.
I love they're so just like, look, Tom, yeah, I will grant you, has an obscene amount of wealth, but look at him talking about campaign finance.
Right, exactly.
Fuck that guy.
Let's go.
Did you get what Brendan just IM'd?
No.
I have to just say, Mark Penn is probably the most sleazy person in the history of politics. That's saying basically Hillary Clinton's top pollster, Mark Penn, is advising Donald Trump on impeachment. And this goes back to this guy, Andrew Stein, who's this he's like a Democratic local politics hack from the 80s that's still friends with Trump. And he and Penn write these articles together where they're just like, advice for Democrats, say immigrants are scum, for the Wall Street Journal and so on. And now through that, Penn is actually giving Trump strategic advice. And in addition to that, I just want to say, good reminder of who the Clintons are.
Yes.
He was a top pollster for them.
I think he was actually wasn't he the campaign manager? Or
he was the
head of top advisors?
Head of Hillary, top strategist for Hillary 2008.
Now,
and a key figure in 1996 reelect.
My favorite story about Mark Penn is when he was working on the Clinton campaign, he was also still working as a lobbyist for, what country was it from? Colombia, to get the CAFTA passed.
Yeah, no, I think it was even a specific Colombia free trade deal. Hillary, of course, this was typical Hillary. She reversed her position on it in the 2008 primary and then was humiliated because Penn was just like, all right, that's great. Everything's in play. I'm going to go to Washington for some other business now. Directly do strategy for the trade agreement you're running against. He also did a memo where
if your top pollster doesn't feel like your campaign is important enough to be your only client for that short period of time,
no,
you may have a problem.
He also it does show you really, especially in the 90s, there is a through line between the Clintons and Trump, and particularly Bill. But even in 2008, Mark Penn's first strategy memo, or one of his main strategy memos on Obama for Hillary, was basically like, Barack Obama, maybe in 2050.
That did not quite work out. Let's go to the IMs here. Water boat from Kashmir. Haven't called or sent an IM with Kashmir update for a while. It's a bit of giving I was a bit giving the listeners a break, but mostly severe stress from dealing with reports of onslaught of abuses in Kashmir and the rolling developments in Kashmir, India, and internationally about the occupation. Keep talking about Kashmir, folks. It's working. Voices from within India are starting to question the Indian establishment. This is the only way to avoid a catastrophic conflict. Global voices are waking up Indians with a conscience. Winter is here and food stocks and fuel are running out. Remember, this is the Himalayas. Indian forces destroying food stocks and taking over private residences. No foreign journalists allowed, and all local human rights commissions and reporting agencies are dissolved. These were never good enough to begin with, but now there's no record keeping of complaints. Absolute savagery in small towns and countryside. I can't emphasize enough. Absolute savagery. Ethnic cleansing machinery moving along. Don't give us thoughts and prayers, folks. Give us voice. Thank you. Keep that in the news, folks.
And connected with the whole ecological crisis in the Himalayas. I mean, if those water starts drying up from those mountains, that's a unprecedented crisis. And part of what they're doing in Kashmir, I understand from people like Waterboat from Kashmir, is basically it's a water control and also like a big ski business opportunity. You can clean out the population and then basically build a bunch of resorts for rich people.
Sam's ex-wife. Sam, please stop talking about me or my father in your ads. Okay. King of all IMers.
You read that one?
Well, I know it's not her.
Oh, it wasn't.
Do you?
No, King of all, yes. King of all IMers, Sam, as the New Year's end, and we all become more reflective, I would like to suggest a new tradition for the show. On the last show of the year, let's have an in memoriam style slideshow of those former Friday show regulars we have lost to Twitter badgering and fights. New human. I've done that sort of haggling while visiting famously anarcho-capitalist country, China. JT from Fresno, Chun from the movie Remo Williams said professional assassination is the highest form of public service. Kevin from the South Side. I 100% agree with John from San Antonio on needing Warren voters after the primaries. I'd also like to add that I used Warren as a gateway drug to get my parents hooked on Bernie. Both supported Hillary in the last election. My mom in particular was salty about Bernie staying in the primaries too long. I figured I couldn't get them to back Bernie, so I wanted them to get at least into Warren's camp after the debates and all the warnings from billionaires attacking Warren and Sanders. Started asking me more questions about Bernie, and I told them he's like Warren, but better on everything. Long story short, their top two are now Sanders 1, Warren 2, Bernie 2020 left his best. I think that is a very good approach. Fairfax Boy, why does Glenn Greenwald still go on Tucker Carlson? I imagine in some part, I think there's a certain contrarian streak that Glenn has. I mean, frankly.
But I'm over it. Glenn Greenwald's one of the most important journalists on the planet and literally under severe physical threat and just doing incredible work. Like,
when he sticks to what he knows. Yes.
I mean, Glenn is amazing and under literal, more threat than certainly anybody complaining about where he goes on TV. So.
Well, that's absolutely true, but they're not necessarily, the idea that you can't separate those two things, I think is wrong. I don't know that him going on Fox News.
Well, as an example, one upshot for him on a very practical level, which did have some implications that were shocking in Brazil, was that Tucker actually recorded a clip defending Glenn specifically in the free press in Brazil, which was very tactical because the Brazilian fascist right worships Fox News. Look, I get it. We've talked about it a million times, but I think people need to keep their eye on the bigger picture with that a little bit.
I think it's a fair question. Nick from Oklahoma. There are 607 billionaires in the U.S. Jailaya. Somehow Matt can do TMBS, his show, MR, and travel to Chicago and somehow only miss a couple of work a couple of times a year. Indeed. Donald Trump's sartorial plaque. Hey guys, I know the rush visit to the hospital was not on the public schedule. Arterial plaque, I see. Donald Trump's arterial plaque. Hey guys, I know the rush visit to the hospital was not on the public schedule and it might seem kind of new here, but trust me, I'm one of the adults in the room. Don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years. That's very funny. Plaque on the arterial.
I got it. It was good.
Christo, Sam,
Hope springs
Michael,
eternal.
I'm wondering if you're familiar with Hal Sparks. I've had on a couple of recent occasions, heard him on the morning so-called progressive radio show disparage you by name as both being too aligned with the extreme left. Subsequent convoluted explanation of the problems with Medicare for all as it all moves too fast and risks exposing people to falling through the cracks. All the while, the plan isn't any different from the ultimate outcomes of Obama-Clinton's healthcare plans anyways. An explanation that went, of course, unquestioned by the regular fart joke-making host. Stupid crap, hated, hear your names in that context. So what was
I have no idea who that person is.
Okay, Brendan just brought him up on the screen. I met this guy years ago because he was in a poly relationship with a girl I knew from Suicide Girls. And he was like the biggest fan that Suicide Girls had.
Well,
He sounds like a really strong critic.
How throughout the years, he hosts a morning show. I don't know if it's just a weekend show in Chicago or not. I can tell you that the owners of the Chicago station booted Ring of Fire from it because we were too critical of Clinton during the 2016 election. Now, I don't know if he had anything to do with that, but at one point, he went after me on Twitter, sort of out of the blue, in the middle of the afternoon. I think you're a fairly decent fellow, he said, but your clickbait bullshit YouTube titles make it seem like you and your team are hell-bent on tightening the race and depressing turnout so Trump can stay in office. For all your whining, you and Dora are on the same team. And I wrote back to him, is there something specific you're thinking about? I'd say your assessment is fairly superficial, but when you're basing it upon a percentage of only my YouTube titles, I think that goes without saying. And then he said, Sam, read all your chosen clip titles for your show for Don't Know, the last 6 months. Then consider the clips pulled versus the whole show, and then don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. Now, I didn't pretend I don't know what to talk about, but I have no idea what he was talking about. And I asked him for an example, and he did at one point, but he doesn't know how to thread his things. Where is it? It's not. He did reply to it at one point.
Okay,
and it
boomer.
was the three examples he gave were so weak that it was embarrassing. And I actually thought that either he was high or having some type of like real problem. And then he got upset about that. And
just sounds really boring. I don't know who that is. I don't care about some mediocrities, mediocre concern trolling.
Sounds like he peaked back in the day.
I mean, I'm sure
here's
he's a
the thing that really
fellow.
bummed me out about it. And it's less less painful now than it was at the time, which is so he was on, I can't remember what, he was on a show like on an HBO or a Showtime show. But then more importantly, he was on a kids show that my daughter watched. And I said, I know that dude. And she was super excited. Now, she doesn't care about that show. So frankly,
sorry, hell.
I don't care.
I mean, I also just think in this kind of, I am highly of the school, and I am going to support in general, whoever is opposed to Trump in the general election. I might allow myself a protest vote in New York, but certainly wouldn't encourage anybody to vote in such a way as to allow Trump to get a second term in a general election, period. And now in a primary, it's called a contest for a reason. And I don't know. There's very bizarre centrist. One is the obvious double standard because they can trash and lie and be disgusting about Sanders all day. But then there's another set of people that seem to sort of generally not understand this is like a voting process and a competition, and you advocate for your choice. So I would just say, relax, Hal, and read up on Medicare for All.
I would say stick to kids' shows and being a spokesman for the poly community.
But here's the thing.
Well, also polyamory is not
But
good.
here's the thing, too, that I find sort of interesting. If his concern is that we are depressing turnout in the general election, well, isn't he doing the same thing by chastising Medicare for All? Like, he's weighing in on the...
well, that was what I was pointing to. I think, like, we got to either... If you want... You know what? This was the funniest tweet I've ever seen in a different context, and it was insane and delusional. But when Lula got out of jail, he put out this awesome montage of him training to Eye of the Tiger, and a reporter from the Wall Street Journal literally quote tweeted, and it was like, I love this guy, and I love Bolsonaro. They're both different, but they both want the best for their country. Now, that was totally insane. But if your attitude is like everybody should just be positive, then just be positive, dude. Embody the change you seek in the world. Have good things to say about Klobuchar and Sanders. Have good things to say about, us and Brian Williams. Just go about your day.
It really did seem... it did seem like there was something else going on, like emotional. Like psychological. I mean, it was just so.
Okay, then no comment.
I wish I could find his and I can't seem to find it. What his examples were that. Oh, that's possible. He then basically said, like, put it up for a public discussion, and then I think he may have gotten a little bit embarrassed with the responses he got. Like, nobody cared what he had to say.
Well, just to undermine his credibility a little bit more, I'm pretty sure he was really into The Secret.
Well, he should be into The Secret. So be positive.
Like,
so manifest
the power
positive
of
energy
positive
towards
thinking.
us.
It's like the most neoliberal shit ever.
I'm visualizing Hal Sparks advocating Medicare for All. And I'm holding that in my mind's eye as an energetic intention and a sign of friendship.
Sam's Tinder profile. Hey, babe, swipe right and let's feel the bloom. Don't worry, you can change me like a corporate billionaire, baby. Social
diaper
Buffalo.
play.
This is
living on the West Coast. I'm usually
Might be
not
good
up
idea.
early enough to hear the show live. Today I am, and I'm treated to what feels like the first libertarian caller in ages. Good shit. Left is best. Rand's Paul, every neighbor. I'm beating Devin's ass next. You're welcome. PhD Dave, anarcho-capitalist libertarianism sounds a lot like feudalism, complete with court intrigue and assassinations. Indeed, yes. Josh and SF. Anyone who listens to the show and supports Bernie needs to start phone banking and knocking on doors. Regular listeners are going to have no problem talking to people about the issues. MR is like a training program for people to talk about politics. Left is best, Baba Booey, Baba Booey. Jay Tingle, Hal Sparks was the third host of Talk Soup on E. That's right. And later acted on Showtime's Queer as Folk. Very surprised to learn he's into Suicide Girls. Not because he's gay, but because Suicide Girls seem like such a scam.
How so? You pay money, you look at pictures of naked women. I don't know what's
Is that what that
about
was?
that.
Is that what's about?
Yeah.
Oh, really, Samantha?
Spay F.
It's so hard to explain to younger millennials that people used to pay for porn.
Exactly. Hal also said that you'd
Exactly.
What? Hal also said you had been accusing Warren of being a secret neoliberal who wanted to start with a war with Iran. Like, honestly, I think he's confused. Matt from
I
Mass.
could say, as the one who's been a much tougher critic of Warren, especially on foreign policy, I definitely have not said that. I do not think Elizabeth Warren wants war with Iran.
Matt from Mass, currently in an argument with someone that says wide structural change is a fantasy and you can't rebel in a democracy. Pray for me. All right, let's go to a couple more of these clips. Here is Stephen Moore apparently has crawled out of his hole and is back on TV. This is after he got rejected as his position on the Fed. You remember, Stephen Moore was one of the people they brought in to do the miracle in Kansas, which turned into a nightmare in Kansas. So much so that Arthur Laffer became a Arthur Laughingstock. And Sam Brownback was actually appointed ambassador to the ether. Literally, he was the ambassador to religion. And so he goes around and ambassadors to religion. Here's Stephen Moore. He's on Fox and Friends talking about another Trump tax cut that's going to come if he gets reelected, supposedly.
And number three, capital gains rollover. How would that work?
Yeah, well, we didn't cut the capital gains tax in the last, in the bill. We wanted to, the one we passed in 2017. So this is the idea, not to make this too complicated, but let's say, Steve, if you own shares of General Electric stock and you sell those shares and then you have a capital gains because you made money on and then if you put that money into buying a new stock, why should you have to pay a capital gains on that? All you're doing is transferring one stock to another. So this is called rollover. It would allow more liquidity in the market, and it would basically say, okay, you pay the tax when you take the money out of the stock market, not if you transfer one stock for another.
Final idea.
Pause it for 1 second. There is no transfer one stock for another. There's nobody on the stock market who says, like, hey, if you give me your GE shares, I'll give you my IBM shares. That's not the way it works.
It's a nice little barter.
No bartering on the stock floor?
There's no bartering, oddly enough. It's not a transfer. You don't call up your broker and say, I want to transfer my stock from one company to another. That's not the way it works.
An apartment swap?
Nope. It is actually what you're doing is you are selling it and getting, in return for selling it, money.
It's called a barter.
And then you are taking your money and buying something else.
Or the great AOL Time Warner barter.
Yeah, the Wall Street barter.
Now, this is modeled, and they're going to start talking about it if they were ever in a position to do it on what happens with your home. You're allowed to take the first $250,000 in profit from your home tax-free, without capital gains tax on the first $250,000. And the theory being that you want people to be able to sort of like buy a bigger home is, I don't necessarily subscribe to this, that you should be doing it, but this is the theory anyways. And then the idea is that it releases housing stock and it encourages new housing builds. Frankly, I don't see why you should have to, you should get away. If you profit on your home, your profit should be taxed. But this is what they're going to model it after. But there is no redeeming value other than, as he said, liquidity in the market. Now, it doesn't create more liquidity. All it does is it gives rich people more money to go park it in the market and to gamble with it. It's bizarre, but no, it's not bizarre. It's completely to be expected.
private accounts for Social Security. And you know that people are going to see that and they're going to go, wait, what are they talking about now?
Well, this is an idea that I don't know if the Trump administration is going to embrace, but it's something I think for middle-class people would be one of the best ways for every American to own stock in America. So instead, the idea would be, rather than having to send your 10% of your paycheck into the black hole Social Security, you'd be able to put that into a personal account, like an index fund. And that means, Steve, everybody in America would benefit when the stock market goes up.
Well, thank you for you of perhaps coming attractions.
Let's pause this. First of all, Social Security is not a black hole. You can ask any people who have reached the age of 65 or older over the past 70 years as to whether it goes into a black hole and never comes out. And they will tell you, no, in fact, yes, my Social Security is here for me. And even if we do nothing about Social Security going forward, which I think we should expand it and obviously increase taxes, it's going to be completely solvent, about 80% of benefits. We do nothing over the next 30, 40 years to improve it. Of course, you could say that about just about anything in terms of what we fund or do not fund. But the idea of having private accounts, as if, let's say, there are, 401ks or IRAs, and Google the words "the failed experiment of the 401k," and you will see in what kind of dire straits the boomer generation is in terms of what they have left for retirement. Social Security is going to be such a huge factor in keeping people out of poverty over the next 30 years. And not just folks who are older, but also taking pressure off of millennials and Gen Xers who are not going to, who are going to be in a position of having to support their parents because of the failed experiment of the 401ks.
Yeah, we do not like to think about what it's going to be like when we're old.
We're going to have to do something.
We're the brokest generation. I think people born between 1980 and 1985, I read, people who graduated around the financial crisis took a hit to their long-term wealth that they are not expected to recover from, or should I say we?
If you look, I just saw a stat. If you look, I think it was, they compared the income that boomers had at age 35 to what Gen Xers had, which was about a third. And millennials, I think, have literally a tenth of what boomers had.
That sounds about right.
I can't remember exactly what the
but you know what? Whatever.
Share of the national income, maybe.
Let's just give everyone their Social Security and poker chips and see how they do.
Here it is. So a fraction of all U.S. wealth owned by boomers and Gen Xers when the average member of each was age 35. Boomers in 1989 owned 20% of the nation's wealth at age 35. Gen X in 2008 owned 8% of the nation's wealth. The average millennial turns 35 in 2023. Right now, they own 3%. Yep. Now, presumably, they're going to own more, theoretically, right? Because you've got another 4 years, but it ain't going to go up that much, folks. Maybe it'll be 4%. Let's go to the phones. You're calling from a 503 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello?
Hello?
Hey, this is Joe in L.A. How you doing?
Good. How you doing, Joe?
Hey, good. Love the show. I'm a patron of TMBS and the Antifada, too. As soon as I get my act together, I'll throw money at Matt, too.
I'd love to hear it. Thank you. That's very nice of you.
It's a long show far. Awesome. All right, two quick things. One, I don't know if any of you saw the Steven Crowder tried to replicate hanging himself in the same conditions as Jeffrey Epstein.
I saw him tweet that he was going to do that, and I just thought to myself, good luck. I hope that you succeed in perfectly capturing the dynamic that took place that night.
Yes. Don't we all? I mean, so yeah, Wahoo, points for conservative comedy. And then, yeah, my other quick question is, I mean, I'm all in for Bernie. I feel like I can easily see through Pete Buttigieg and his facade. And I know he's being disingenuous when he says that Medicare for all will kick people off of their private insurance, and they won't be uninsured, they'll be on Medicare for all. But can you, in very simple terms, explain why something like Medicare for all who want it, or the public option specifically, will not work, and why only Medicare for all system is the way forward?
Well, the problem with a Medicare for all public option, and Don Berwick, the former head of the not the CDC but of CMS, which was basically the head of Medicare and Medicaid. The problem with the public option is that you're going to get people who are rejected by traditional health insurance, either rejected outright, which is much harder to do in this instance now because of the ACA, or rejected insofar as it's going to be too expensive. And the people who are going to be rejected, or basically prevented from entering private insurance because of cost, are going to be people who have pre-existing conditions or already have some type of health issues, or from an actuarial standpoint might be more likely to be sick, okay, which would tend to be maybe older people and whatnot. And so all these people are going to come into the system. And the whole way that insurance works is you need to equally distribute the risk pool amongst potential people in it who are paying into the system. Now, I don't know what would happen if everybody had to pay for their health insurance, but had a different option in which they want to do it. I think you'd have a problem in terms of on the delivery side, because you'd have doctors as suppliers deciding they're not going to take Medicare for all patients or Medicare option patients. I'm only going to take private patients, which could also happen with the public option. So the problem is, one, risk pool. You're creating a sicker risk pool for the public program, which will make that more expensive. Two, you're also creating a potential problem on the supply, on the medical delivery side, because you may have those doctors saying, well, payments, they're trying to control costs on the public option, so I'm not going to take those patients. Instead, I'm going to take the people from the private insurance industry. Now, I suppose there are fixes that are possible for that, that latter problem where you would say, like, you're not going to get accredited by state regulators unless you take X amount of percentage of patients from the public plan. But you would also need everybody to pay into the public plan, whether they use it or not, which I think would be politically untenable and certainly not what Buttigieg is suggesting. He's just suggesting that you can buy into it or you can choose to go into it. And the people who are going to choose to go into it are going to be the ones who can't get private insurance through their employer. And that's going to be a problem. It's going to screw up the risk pool. It's a basic, it's like, let's put it this way. If you had fire insurance and you were going to offer fire insurance, you don't want people who live, you want as many people, you want people who live in non-fire zones as well as people who live in fire zones. Because if you only take the people who live in fire zones, it's going to cost more to insure them, because the people who are paying in are more likely to need the insurance. I mean, insurance, the whole process, the whole invention of insurance is supposed to be, nobody knows, we know a certain percentage of people in the population are going to be struck by a problem, but nobody knows who it is. And so if we get all the people who are potentially could be struck by this problem to pay in, they're basically covering themselves in the event that they end up being one of these people and need this type of support. And the only way to do it in such a way that is cost effective is to get the widest pool possible. Insurance companies want to make sure that not they get the widest pool possible. They want to get the most favorable pool possible. So if they're going to offer fire insurance, they're going to find the one place in the country where there's the least likelihood of houses catching on fire, and they want to insure only those people because they can take their premiums and not pay out. So that's the dynamic. It's all about the risk pool, and then secondarily, on the supplier side.
Yeah, two more things to think about. Like when you have a monopoly on who's paying, which is what single payer is, it's much easier and you're in a much stronger position to bargain down the costs because these providers can't go anywhere else. You're the only game in town.
That's the only problem with that is that there are, and we talked about this with Tim Faust when he was on, there are monopolies in terms of providers as well. And so if you're the only, particularly like in rural areas, if you're the only hospital in town, you can just say to Medicare, we're just not going to take your rates. Now,
well, we also got to break up the monopolies.
Exactly.
As a corollary
you
to
can
that.
also just
And also
assassinate the leaders of those monopolies.
Like it's not hard to see how a universal program would be more durable in the long term, right? Because if the people with the money and the power are funding a separate healthcare system for poor people with their taxes, it's going to be in their interests to try to make cuts to that program because they don't want to pay for it. If everybody in society is using it, it's going to be a lot less vulnerable to cuts and attack in the long run.
Appreciate the call.
Baba Booey. Thank you.
All right, folks. Let's just do this. Brett Stevens, we will end this delicious meal of a show on a fine wine. Hold on, let's take one more call and then we'll do this fine wine. Calling from a 208 area code. I'm going to take more calls tomorrow, folks. Janine is unable to make it tomorrow. She's en route to L.A. But you're calling from a 208 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? You are the final caller of the day.
All right. Been trying for a week. This is Sean calling from Idaho. Not a libertarian.
Well, Sean.
I'm calling. Hello?
Go ahead. What do you got for us?
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, sir, I can.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm calling because, one of the undertows of this, all these core appointments that are taking place, we have been focusing, and rightfully so, on women's reproductive rights and other issues. But something that isn't really being addressed is the way that the appeal court works in dealing with social services like Social Security disability. And I'm just wondering why this isn't being talked about too much when, there was a big deal about Trump not wanting to cut Social Security, but this is their way of denying thousands more people and driving them into bankruptcy because the application process in the fight can take 3 to 4 years at times.
Well, I think part of it is, there's so much, I think part of it is a failure of, frankly, of the Democrats. And part of it is there's just so much news that these things get overwhelmed, frankly. And you don't have reporters who are on the beat, covering this stuff in the same way. You there?
Yeah, I am. The thing is that mental health cases and things like that, the infrastructure for helping people like that, one of the only options is Social Security disability. And while, they window paint wanting to help mental health, they never really talk about the services that benefit those types of patients the most.
Yeah.
Because there's not a lot of stability for employability when somebody has those kinds of problems. I mean, I'm on the spectrum myself, and it's just really tough to find employers with enough patience to not just let you go without a disability rating.
Well, I mean, I would imagine, and I think to a certain extent, one of the things that we talk about with Bertie's Medicare for All program is, more support for mental health and that. And to a certain extent, this is what Jamie was talking about. Making something universal becomes much harder to attack specific segments of the social, of social safety net needs, I guess you call it, or health needs, when everybody's in the same boat. But I wish you luck, and I appreciate your call. And if you have any specific sort of reported stories on this, send it to us, and be happy to talk about it more.
Will do.
Right.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Appreciate the call. All right. Hang in there, too. All right, folks. That is the phone portion of our program. And let's just do one last clip. Like I say, we will finish with this dessert wine, if you will, on today's program. This is Brett Stevens, who is
washing down a little bed bug.
So agitated at the idea that we would malign billionaires, or really the existence of billionaires. I mean, look, is there any other class of people that are so sensitive to being addressed as a function of their wealth? And I should note that these people really do live in a completely different world than we do.
I think people, there's a failure of imagination of just how much more $1 billion is than $1 million.
I will tell you something. I have a buddy who worked for a billionaire as one of his lieutenants for a couple of years. And we went and had lunch, and he says, look, I know your opinion of billionaires, and I know how completely effed up you think the system is and how much they get away with and this and that. And I will tell you, it is much worse than you think. And, he had said this to me after he left the employee. He's like, I couldn't even handle it. He's like, it was nuts. The power they wield. They don't go through, there's no such thing as customs if you're a billionaire,
right.
Which these are small, mechanical things. But it's you see something at a university that you read about that you have a problem with, get on the phone, you yell at the president of the university, you hang up, and then it all changes. I mean, he said, it's nuts.
Well, they did work 1 billion times harder than everybody else,
there you
so
go.
they
Exactly.
deserve it.
And it has nothing to do, 10 seconds, even if that is in a positive direction, it is just a structural threat to democracy.
Without a doubt.
Irrelevant. The function's the problem, not the personality.
We need to be able to separate money from politics. And not just in terms of we have gone from a plutonomy to a plutocracy, wherein by nature of the amount of money they have the ability to fundamentally alter public policy, like we saw with Gates in education, like we see across the board in a whole host of things that are far less obvious and transparent, or even semi-transparent. But here is Brett Stevens. He's really annoyed by Anand Giridharadas' critique of billionaires.
This whole line, plutes are going to plute, that's just the same sort of categorization of people I think that Donald Trump engages in. There's a world of difference between not only a Bloomberg and a Trump, but also, among these people, what their ideas are. Don't you want a Democrat who represents middle-class interests, which rather than just soak the rich, they're all bad, they're against us?
Pause it for 1 second. This idea that the problem with Trump is he categorizes people, right? That's what he's saying. To say that plutocrats are gonna plutocrat, it's categorizing people, and that's just like Trump.
Well, he's making a false equivalency to when Trump calls Mexicans rapists.
Exactly. It's a slightly different. It's slightly
what do you
different
mean,
thing.
Protect the middle class by helping billionaires? What are you talking about?
You know what? when you say plutes are going to plute, you're using words. Guess who else uses words? Donald Trump.
And not just words, names.
Names. Yeah, plutes. Why can't you call them by their full names? Plutocrats. Good.
And have a kind of a spirit of class warfare in the Democratic Party?
A couple things. First of all, you don't need to tell me this is America. I'm from America, so I understand, and there's different values at stake in America, and we can all claim different values. The values I'm talking about are also American. Second of all, when you have someone like Mike Bloomberg, I agree with you that he's very different from Donald Trump. I agree with you there's a difference in starting your own business and inheriting money. But the argument that I have made in this book, and that I'm happy to send you a copy because you sound pre, not post, is that even if you have given a bunch away, you have benefited from a system over the last 30, 40 years in this country. If you look at the data on the capture with 1% to 0.1%, it's simply too much. If you look at the 0.1%, holding now more wealth than the bottom 80% of Americans, the 1% getting 49% of new income. The data you know and that you and I both know, that the issue is, unless you are showing as a very wealthy person that you are breaking down that system, you are, in a sense, complicit in that system. And Michael Bloomberg has shown zero appetite, I'll let you finish, to fundamentally alter that system. And so to say that's America, my America is not an America in which most people who work 40 hours a week at the bottom half of the country do not anymore feel like they can move ahead, get education, get health care. That's not my America. My America is not a country in which, you know, the 400 wealthiest families pay a lower effective tax rate than any other social class in this country. So we can talk about what America is, but the way America is actually working for a lot of people who never get to be at this table right now is that it doesn't actually work anymore. The American dream is a phrase, and the idea that the savior from plutocracy is a plutocrat is not class warfare. It's not the same as Donald Trump, and it is actually simply trying to suggest that maybe we can actually trust people who come out of popular movements, people who...
Yeah, there you go. I mean, you get the gist. The idea that they keep bringing Bret Stephens on to make this case that we shouldn't bully the 600 billionaires in this country because what? Like, what is going on?
I thought it was a lot, even for me, when, and I don't know why we cut it out, when the next second Anand started going, is it itchy in here?
Yeah, the whole bed bug thing.
I feel the presence of something. God, I thought you guys disinfected this place. Bed bugs on the Morning Joe set?
This is what happens when people treat class like it's just another identity. Like, you can be classist. Rich people should be nice to poor people. Poor people should be nice to rich people. We should all just get along, like, you know, people of different races, people of different genders. Guess what? It's different. It is inherently mean to poor people to be a billionaire. It is a zero-sum game in a way that these other things are not.
Without a doubt. All right, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught.